You've been carrying the weight of your mistakes for too long. They told you forgiveness is something you owe to others, but no one ever taught you how to forgive yourself. That's why, even in your quietest moments, the guilt lingers, the regret whispers, the shame locks you in a prison with no walls. But here's the truth: you are not your past. You are not your worst day, your bad decision, or the voice in your head that keeps telling you that you're unworthy. And Buddhist wisdom holds the key to your freedom. For centuries, monks, teachers, and seekers have walked the same path you're on, a path of confusion, guilt, and self-blame. And they discovered a way out, not by erasing mistakes, not by pretending pain doesn't exist, but by seeing clearly, by breathing deeply, by realizing that every scar is just part of the journey, not the end of it. Tonight, as you hear these lessons, something inside you will begin to soften. The heavy chains of self-blame will start to loosen. Your heart will open just a little wider, enough to let light in where the darkness has lived. And tomorrow, when you wake, you'll feel lighter, like stepping out of an old story that never belonged to you in the first place. This isn't just another teaching. This is your invitation to finally forgive yourself, to stop fighting the past, and to start living free. Are you ready? Let's begin. You've taken the first step by opening your heart to the possibility of forgiveness. That spark of willingness is powerful. It means you are ready to see differently, to walk away from the patterns that have kept you stuck, to finally loosen the grip of old beliefs. And among the most subtle, yet most damaging of these beliefs is the hidden obsession with being flawless. It disguises itself as discipline, as ambition, even as virtue, but underneath it is nothing more than a quiet prison that keeps you running in circles. We grow up being told to be better, to aim higher, to prove our worth in every arena of life. Parents, teachers, society, they hand us a measuring stick that is always just out of reach. You tell yourself that if only you worked harder, made fewer mistakes, looked a certain way, spoke more eloquently, earned more, or acted more kindly, then you would finally feel good enough. But no matter what you do, the finish line moves further away. This is the tyranny of self-perfection. It promises happiness, but delivers exhaustion. Buddhism exposes this illusion by showing us that the very idea of perfection is built on shaky ground. There is no fixed self to polish until it shines. What you call you is not a single unchanging entity, but a stream of thoughts, emotions, choices, and conditions that rise and fall like waves on water. When you see this clearly, the urge to sculpt yourself into some flawless statue loses its hold. How can you perfect something that is never solid, never finished, never one thing? You are not a monument to be admired. You are a living process, constantly changing. Perfection demands control. It whispers that if you just tighten your grip hard enough, you can stop the chaos, prevent mistakes, and hold life still in your hands. But Buddhism teaches that clinging is the root of suffering. You clutch at an image of who you think you should be, and in the process, you strangle the joy of who you already are. The harder you grasp, the more life slips through your fingers. The wisdom here is not in holding tighter, but in releasing. True freedom comes when you allow yourself to unfold naturally, imperfectly, beautifully incomplete. Think of how nature operates. A tree grows with knots, bends, and scars in its bark. No one stands before it demanding straighter branches or smoother leaves. Its very irregularities make it beautiful. Yet when it comes to ourselves, we insist on straightening, sanding down, cutting away anything we label flawed. Buddhism invites you to look again. Those so-called flaws are not obstacles. They are part of your unique expression of life. To erase them would be to erase yourself. The obsession with perfection also fuels endless self-criticism. Every mistake becomes evidence against you, every failure proof of unworthiness. But Buddhist practice softens this harshness through mindfulness. When you observe your thoughts without judgment, you begin to see that self-criticism is just another passing phenomenon, no more solid than a cloud. It does not define you. You don't have to obey it. By stepping back and watching the stream of inner voices, you loosen their authority. You begin to treat yourself with the same compassion you would offer a friend. What you may not realize is that the chase for perfection is tied to fear. Fear of rejection, fear of not being loved, fear of death itself. If you could just be flawless, maybe you could escape the fragility of being human. But Buddhism turns this fear into wisdom. It reminds us that everything is impermanent. Bodies age, achievements fade, memories dissolve. No matter how perfect you try to be, time will wipe the slate clean. This is not meant to depress you, it is meant to liberate you. Once you accept impermanence, the pressure to be flawless loses its grip. You see that life's beauty is in its fleetingness, not in its permanence. There is also a deep connection between perfectionism and ego. The mind loves to build an identity. I am the successful one, the moral one, the intelligent one, the disciplined one. Perfection feeds this identity, giving it fuel to appear strong and untouchable. But beneath it, there is always insecurity. Buddhism cuts through this illusion by showing that the ego itself is empty. The more you cling to a perfect image of yourself, the more fragile you become, because reality will inevitably shatter it. The path of wisdom is not in polishing the mask, but in realizing you never needed a mask at all. When you let go of self-perfection, you begin to taste a deeper kind of freedom. It is not the freedom of being admired by others, but the freedom of resting in your own being without needing to prove anything. You act not from a desperate attempt to be worthy, but from the simple joy of being alive. This does not mean you stop growing or caring. It means your growth is no longer driven by fear, but by curiosity, love, and compassion. Your efforts are no longer a frantic scramble, but a natural flowering. Think of the Buddha's middle way, the path between extremes. On one side is harsh self-denial, the endless striving for flawlessness. On the other side is careless indulgence, where you give up all responsibility. The middle way is neither. It is the steady, gentle practice of living fully as you are, while walking the path of awareness and compassion. You do not have to be perfect to walk this path. You only have to be sincere. And sincerity is something perfection can never give you. Perfection demands a mask, a performance, an image. Sincerity requires vulnerability. It asks you to show up as you truly are, with your uncertainties, your wounds, your unfinished edges. And strangely, it is in this raw sincerity that people feel closest to you and where you feel closest to yourself. Because connection comes not through flawless images, but through shared humanity. Buddhism teaches that the root of suffering is ignorance, our mistaken beliefs about reality. One of the most persistent is the belief that we can perfect ourselves into freedom. But freedom never lies at the end of perfection. It lies in the release of it. You don't become free when you erase every flaw. You become free when you stop measuring yourself against an impossible standard. You become free when you realize that you are not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The subtle tyranny of self-perfection can hide even in spiritual practice. You may catch yourself trying to be the perfect meditator, the perfect Buddhist, the perfect follower of the path. You tell yourself that if only you meditated longer, sat straighter, chanted better, then you would be worthy of awakening. But the Dharma is not about achieving a perfect version of yourself. It is about seeing clearly the nature of reality. Even the Buddha himself spoke of mistakes he made on his journey, and of the futility of extreme asceticism. The path is not about self-polishing, but self-liberation. In daily life, this teaching can transform the smallest moments. When you make a mistake at work, instead of spiraling into self-criticism, you can pause, breathe, and see it as part of the process. When you snap at someone you love, instead of drowning in guilt, you can acknowledge it, apologize sincerely, and learn from it. Each moment becomes an opportunity, not a verdict. You stop turning every flaw into a life sentence, and instead let it be a single line in the ongoing story of your growth. The irony is that when you release the grip of perfection, you often grow more quickly, because you are no longer paralyzed by fear of failure. You can take risks, try new things, learn openly. You can fail, and in failing, discover truths you never would have found otherwise. The mind becomes lighter, more flexible, more creative. Perfection closes doors. Acceptance opens them. The wisdom of imperfection can be found in countless Buddhist stories. One tale speaks of a monk whose chanting was always out of tune. Other monks laughed at him, yet the teacher praised his sincerity. What mattered was not the flawless sound, but the heart behind it. Another story tells of pottery in Japan, repaired with gold, making the cracks part of its beauty. This practice, rooted in the Buddhist sense of impermanence, shows us that scars are not flaws to hide, but lines of wisdom that shine brighter than any surface untouched by life. In relationships, letting go of perfection brings intimacy. When you stop demanding a flawless self, you stop demanding flawless others. You begin to see them as whole in their humanity, and forgiveness becomes easier. You no longer expect your partner, your children, or your friends to carry the impossible weight of your expectations, and in doing so, love becomes more real, more grounded, less fragile. At work, the same wisdom applies. Perfectionism drives burnout, anxiety, endless dissatisfaction. But when you shift your focus from flawless results to wholehearted effort, everything changes. Your work becomes an offering, not a performance. Mistakes become lessons, not curses. And the energy you once spent on self-punishment becomes fuel for creativity. This dismantling of perfectionism is not about lowering standards, but about liberating yourself from chains. It's about realizing that the true standard is not flawless execution, but wholehearted presence. To show up with honesty, to give your best effort, and to let the outcome unfold, this is the way of freedom. And as you absorb this truth, you begin to notice a gentle loosening inside. The harsh inner judge softens. The tight grip of fear relaxes. You see that freedom is not waiting at the end of the road after you've achieved some impossible perfection. It is here, in this breath, in this moment, in this acceptance. Letting go of perfection is not the end of your path, it is the beginning. It opens the door to seeing karma in a new light, not as punishment for failing to be flawless, but as the natural momentum of your choices and actions. This shift will guide you further into freedom, where guilt no longer chains you to the past, and every step forward carries the possibility of renewal. Letting go of perfection is not the end of your healing, it is only the clearing of space. When the weight of flawless standards drops from your shoulders, another question quietly rises. If I am no longer defined by mistakes, then what do those mistakes mean? This is where karma often steps onto the stage, misunderstood, feared, and twisted into a story of punishment. People hear the word and think of judgment, as if life were keeping a ledger, tallying sins and preparing a sentence. But the Dharma shows something far more freeing. Karma is not a prison warden. It is the echo of your own footsteps. It is not moral debt waiting to crush you, but energy in motion, momentum that can always be redirected. The old belief that karma punishes you is heavy with guilt, and guilt keeps you chained to the past. But karma is not about punishment. It is about cause and effect. Every action leaves a trace, just as every drop in a river contributes to its flow. When you strike a bell, sound arises. When you plant a seed, growth begins. The bell does not punish you for striking it, nor does the soil scold you for planting. They simply respond. Karma is this responsiveness of life itself. Understanding this transforms the way you hold regret. A mistake is not a permanent stain. It is simply a cause whose effect you can learn from. When you see karma this way, you begin to take responsibility without being crushed by it. Responsibility is clear seeing. This choice leads to this result. Punishment belongs to the realm of fear, but responsibility belongs to wisdom. A harsh word may hurt someone, but that does not mean you are forever condemned. It means you now see how words carry weight, and with that awareness, you can choose differently next time. The past does not lock the door, it shows you where the handle is. Guilt thrives on the fantasy of a permanent mistake, but karma dissolves that fantasy. If karma is movement, then nothing is frozen. Even the worst action sets ripples in motion, and ripples can meet other ripples, shifting, redirecting, dissolving. Life is fluid, never still. When you feel paralyzed by regret, it is because you have forgotten this truth. The moment you breathe into the present, you are already creating new momentum. The past cannot be erased, but the future is not yet written, and the energy you direct now can transform the shape of what comes. There is freedom in understanding that karma is not controlled by a divine judge, but by conditions. Just as fire burns regardless of who touches it, actions carry results regardless of who commits them. This is not punishment, it is the neutral law of interdependence. And because it is neutral, it is also hopeful. If conditions create suffering, new conditions can create release. A harsh word can be followed by a gentle apology. A selfish act can be balanced with kindness. The weight of yesterday can become the soil of tomorrow. The Buddha himself framed karma as intention. What matters is not only what you do, but the state of mind from which you act. This is where transformation becomes possible. If you act from anger, anger multiplies. If you act from compassion, compassion expands. You do not need to erase your past to walk a freer path. You need only turn your intention toward a new direction. Karma follows the tilt of your heart. This understanding relieves the fear that you are doomed by past mistakes. Even heavy karma can be softened when met with wisdom and compassion. Think of a drop of ink falling into a glass of water. It darkens the whole glass. But if the same drop falls into a vast lake, its effect is almost invisible. In the same way, a harmful act in a narrow, self-centered life feels overwhelming. But as you expand your practice of kindness, generosity, and mindfulness, that same act becomes a smaller part of a larger whole. You cannot erase the drop, but you can expand the lake. This shift in perspective is vital for self-forgiveness. If karma were punishment, you would carry regret like an eternal sentence. But if karma is momentum, then every breath you take is a new beginning. Every thought, word, and act is an opportunity to shift the current. Instead of drowning in guilt, you become curious. What seeds am I planting right now? What ripples am I setting in motion? You begin to live as a gardener rather than a prisoner, nurturing what will bring peace instead of punishing yourself for past weeds. Practical life reflects this truth clearly. If you have spoken unkindly, you can speak gently now. If you have acted selfishly, you can act generously now. Each new action carries its own weight, and momentum builds with practice. Small choices, repeated often, reshape your life's direction. Karma is not the handcuff of destiny. It is the wheel you steer. You are not at the mercy of your past. You are the author of your next step. This does not mean actions have no consequence. The wound caused by harm may take time to heal. A broken trust may require patience to rebuild. But even here, karma offers wisdom. Healing itself is karma in motion, the result of nurturing, patience, and sincere effort. You cannot snap your fingers and erase pain, but you can provide the conditions for recovery. This is why self-forgiveness is not a denial of harm, but a redirection of energy. You acknowledge what was done, you see its effects, and you choose to move with care, creating conditions for repair rather than sinking into despair. Karma as momentum also teaches humility. Just as your actions ripple outward, so too do the actions of others shape your life. No one acts in isolation. You are not solely defined by what you did, but also by the countless influences around you, your upbringing, your environment, your struggles. This is not an excuse to avoid responsibility. It is a reminder to hold your past with compassion. You did not act in a vacuum. You acted within conditions, and conditions can change. The same forces that shaped your mistakes can now shape your healing. This perspective dismantles the voice that says, "I will always be this way." Nothing in Buddhism supports that idea. Everything is impermanent, including your habits and patterns. Karma shows that with every intentional choice, you are shaping who you become. Even deeply ingrained tendencies are not permanent chains, but grooves worn by repeated momentum. With awareness, those grooves can be reshaped. The more you redirect your energy toward compassion, patience, and wisdom, the more those qualities become natural, until they flow as easily as your old patterns once did. Understanding karma as momentum allows you to meet regret differently. Instead of collapsing into shame, you ask, "What did this action teach me?" Instead of fearing punishment, you see consequence as feedback. Pain becomes a teacher, not an executioner. If touching a hot stove burns you, the pain is not punishment. It is the body's way of guiding you not to touch again. Karma works the same way. When actions bring suffering, it is life's way of pointing you toward another path. Regret becomes a compass, not a chain. This approach frees you from both denial and self-condemnation. You no longer need to pretend that mistakes never happened, nor do you need to brand yourself with them forever. Instead, you hold them gently as signals, reminders of where unconsciousness led you astray, and guides toward greater awareness. The very things you once hated in yourself become stepping stones on the path. On a practical level, mindfulness is the key to seeing karma as it unfolds. Without awareness, you act out of habit, repeating the same mistakes and deepening the grooves of suffering. With awareness, you notice the impulse before it hardens into action. You see anger rising, and instead of speaking words that wound, you pause and breathe. In that moment, you change the momentum. The energy of anger dissolves instead of multiplying. This is how liberation happens, not in grand gestures, but in small, consistent shifts of awareness that redirect the current of your life. Compassion also transforms karma. When you soften your heart toward yourself and others, you begin to interrupt cycles of harm. Anger answered with anger multiplies suffering, but anger met with compassion stops the chain. Self-hatred met with more. Self-hatred deepens despair, but self-hatred met with kindness opens a door. Compassion is not weakness, it is the force that turns momentum from destruction to healing. Forgiving yourself becomes natural when you see karma clearly. There is no eternal debt, there is only energy, flowing, shifting, open to redirection. You are not sentenced to suffer forever because of what you once did. You are invited to meet the present with awareness, and in doing so, to reshape the future. The river of your life is not fixed, it bends with every choice you make. Seeing karma as momentum also teaches patience. Change does not always happen instantly. Just as a large ship turns slowly, the patterns of your life may take time to redirect. But each small adjustment matters. Every gentle act, every mindful breath, every choice to respond with compassion rather than fear is a shift in current. Over time, the momentum builds, and what once felt impossible becomes natural. Patience is not passive. It is the steady trust that consistent effort reshapes the flow. In this light, forgiveness is not forgetting or excusing. It is understanding. It is seeing your actions within the web of conditions, acknowledging the momentum they created, and choosing to guide that momentum toward healing. It is realizing that guilt holds you in place, but compassion allows you to move. The past is not erased, but it is no longer the dictator of your future. This is the gift of karma understood through wisdom. Instead of living under a sentence of punishment, you live with the responsibility of freedom. Every choice is a seed, and seeds grow according to care. You cannot control every outcome, but you can nurture the direction of growth. Forgiveness arises naturally in this soil, not as indulgence but as clarity. You forgive because you see that carrying the weight of guilt serves no one, while planting new seeds benefits everyone. The teaching of karma as momentum is not abstract, it is a daily practice. Each morning you wake, the momentum of yesterday may still be present, but your intention today can bend its path. Each conversation, each decision, each breath is an opportunity to shift the flow. No act of kindness is too small, no moment of awareness too insignificant. Life is fluid, and freedom is found in how you guide its motion. When you rest in this understanding, you begin to feel lighter. The chains of punishment fall away, and in their place is the gentle responsibility of choosing well, here and now. You are not condemned to repeat the past. You are empowered to create anew. Karma is not the end of freedom, it is the doorway to it. And as you walk through that doorway, you begin to see another subtle trap waiting on the path, the extremes of shame and shamelessness. To avoid punishment, many drown in guilt. To escape guilt, others numb themselves into carelessness. But the Dharma points to a balance, a way of living responsibly without self-torture, aware without being crushed. This balance is the next step in learning to forgive yourself and to live free. When the weight of karma is no longer feared as punishment, but understood as energy and motion, a new space opens within. Yet in this space, the human heart often swings between two painful extremes. On one side lies shame, the heavy voice that whispers, "You are broken, unworthy, unredeemable." On the other side lies shamelessness, the careless avoidance of responsibility, the refusal to feel the impact of your actions. Both imprison you in different ways: shame, by chaining you to self-condemnation; shamelessness, by cutting you off from growth and empathy. The Dharma points to a path beyond these extremes, a way of walking with awareness and compassion, where you can face your actions honestly without being crushed, and move forward without denial. Shame thrives on the illusion of permanence. It convinces you that a single mistake defines your entire being, that your worth is forever contaminated. This voice becomes so loud that it drowns out every act of kindness, every effort to change, every seed of goodness that exists within you. Buddhism dismantles this illusion through the truth of impermanence. No mental state, no identity, no story is fixed. Just as clouds shift across the sky, your sense of self is fluid. The action you regret is not a permanent brand, but one moment in a stream of moments. When you see this clearly, shame loses its authority. You are not frozen in one act. You are alive, changing, and open to renewal. Yet to swing away from shame into shamelessness is no less dangerous. Shamelessness denies the impact of what you do. It numbs you, convinces you that nothing matters, that you can act without consequence. But this cuts you off from the very heart of compassion. If you cannot feel the weight of your actions, you cannot learn from them, nor can you truly connect to others. Shamelessness creates a cold distance, an emptiness where empathy should live. The Buddha did not teach indifference, but awareness rooted in kindness. To ignore the harm you cause is not freedom, it is blindness. The middle way is the balance point, where self-awareness is present but not poisoned by self-hatred, where responsibility is accepted without collapsing into despair. Walking this path means acknowledging the reality of your actions while also holding space for your humanity. You learn to say, "Yes, I caused harm," without adding, "and therefore I am worthless." You learn to accept accountability without drowning in punishment. This balance nurtures growth rather than paralysis. Mindfulness is the foundation of this balance. By observing your thoughts and feelings as they arise, you begin to notice the pull toward shame or shamelessness. When shame arises, mindfulness lets you see it as a passing mental state rather than an ultimate truth. When shamelessness tempts you to dismiss responsibility, mindfulness brings you back to the reality of consequences. This awareness creates space to choose wisely, to respond with clarity rather than habit. Compassion is the next step. When shame takes hold, compassion reminds you that suffering is part of the human condition, that everyone falters, that pain does not make you less worthy of love. When shamelessness tempts you to harden your heart, compassion softens you, reminding you of the shared vulnerability of others. Compassion is the thread that weaves responsibility and forgiveness together, creating a fabric strong enough to hold both truth and healing. The middle way also requires humility. Shame often arises from pride, turned inward, the belief that you should be above mistakes, that failure makes you less than others. Shamelessness arises from pride turned outward, the belief that you are above accountability, that others' suffering is less important than your comfort. Humility cuts through both. It reminds you that you are neither above nor below, but part of the same fragile human web as everyone else. This humility opens the door to sincerity, where you can admit faults honestly and still stand with dignity. In relationships, this balance changes everything. Shame often makes you withdraw, hiding mistakes for fear of judgment. Shamelessness pushes you to dismiss others' pain, pretending it does not matter. But the middle way invites openness. You can admit when you have hurt someone without shrinking into self-loathing, and you can care for their hurt without losing yourself in endless guilt. This creates genuine reconciliation, built not on denial or self-punishment, but on truth and compassion. In daily life, the balance between shame and shamelessness allows for real learning. When shame dominates, every failure feels catastrophic, so you avoid risk, stifle creativity, and bury your voice. When shamelessness dominates, you repeat mistakes, blind to their cost. But in balance, failure becomes a teacher. You can try, stumble, learn, and try again. You see errors not as verdicts but as lessons, and lessons naturally lead to wisdom. This middle way also transforms how you relate to yourself internally. Shame fills the mind with harsh inner dialogue, words you would never speak to another person. Shamelessness silences the voice altogether, ignoring its guidance. Balance invites a new inner language, honest but gentle, clear but kind. Instead of, "I am worthless," you say, "That choice brought pain, and I can choose differently." Instead of, "It doesn't matter," you say, "This matters, and I will care." The tone shifts from condemnation or dismissal to compassionate responsibility. Buddhist practice offers concrete tools to cultivate this balance. Metta meditation, the practice of loving kindness, helps dissolve shame by nurturing unconditional goodwill toward yourself. Repeating phrases like, "May I be free from suffering," "May I be at peace," softens the inner critic. At the same time, mindfulness of actions keeps shamelessness in check as you pay attention to the ripples your behavior creates. These practices together form a compass, guiding you steadily along the middle way. Another layer of balance is the recognition of interdependence. Shame isolates you, convincing you that your failures separate you from others. Shamelessness isolates in another way, by closing you off from the reality of others' feelings. But interdependence reveals that your life and actions are woven into a larger fabric. Your mistakes are not unique failures. They are part of the shared human experience. Your acts of kindness are not isolated gestures. They ripple outward to touch others. When you see yourself within this web, extremes soften. You cannot hate yourself as utterly as shame demands, nor can you dismiss others as shamelessness tempts. This middle way is not a fixed point, but a living practice. At times you may lean too far toward shame, at other times toward shamelessness. The balance is found by continually returning, again and again, to awareness, compassion, humility, and interconnection. Each return strengthens your ability to walk steadily, even when the path feels narrow. As this practice deepens, you begin to sense a new kind of freedom. You are no longer trapped in the endless cycle of self-condemnation, nor lost in the haze of indifference. Instead, you live with honesty, responsibility, and kindness. You forgive yourself without excusing harm, and you grow without drowning in guilt. You discover that balance is not a compromise but a strength, a way of being fully awake and fully human. And in this strength, another illusion begins to dissolve. Shame insists that mistakes are permanent marks. Shamelessness pretends they leave no mark at all. But the Dharma teaches that both are wrong. The truth lies deeper, in the nature of emptiness itself. To see clearly that no mistake is fixed, no identity is solid, no failure is eternal, that is the next step on the path of self-forgiveness and freedom. When balance frees you from the pull of shame and the numbness of shamelessness, a deeper question still lingers. Why do mistakes feel so permanent, as if they carve scars into your very identity? Why does one action, one word, one choice from the past seem to define the whole of who you are? The human mind clings to these moments, replaying them as though they form the core of your being. But Buddhism reveals that this belief rests on a misunderstanding. The self you think is solid, fixed, unchanging, is, in truth, empty. And when you begin to see this emptiness clearly, the idea of a permanent mistake dissolves like salt in water. Emptiness in Buddhism is often misunderstood as a void, a bleak nothingness. But emptiness is not the absence of life, it is the absence of solidity. It means that everything you call self is made of conditions that arise and pass away. Your thoughts are not permanent, your emotions are not permanent, your body is not permanent, and the identity you hold onto is not permanent. It shifts moment by moment. Just as a flame depends on fuel, air, and heat, your sense of self depends on countless causes and conditions. Remove one condition, and the flame changes or disappears. In the same way, the you who made a mistake yesterday is not the you who is reading these words now. The illusion of a permanent mistake comes from clinging to a frozen image of yourself. The mind takes one event and turns it into a defining label. I am the liar. I am the failure. I am the one who betrayed. But in reality, the mistake was one act, one moment in time. It has no power to define the infinite stream of your being unless you give it that power. When you see that the self is fluid, you see that no single action can capture your whole essence. Mistakes are moments, not monuments. Emptiness also means that mistakes themselves have no fixed identity. A harmful act may seem unforgivable, but when you look closely, you see it arose from conditions: fear, ignorance, pain, misunderstanding. Just as fire needs fuel, mistakes need causes. If those causes change, the action does not arise again. What seemed permanent reveals itself as conditional, dependent, and therefore transformable. The label unforgivable falls apart under this insight. What exists are conditions that can be changed, not eternal stains that cannot be removed. This truth brings a profound release from guilt. When you cling to the idea of a solid self, you carry every mistake as if engraved into your being. But when you see that the self is empty, you realize there is no fixed entity to carry those engravings. The past you regret is already gone. The self you blame no longer exists. What remains is this present moment, fresh and open. Forgiveness becomes natural when you see there is no permanent, wrong person to condemn. The teaching of emptiness is not abstract. It can be lived in every moment. When you catch yourself replaying an old failure, pause and ask, who is it that failed? Was it the person sitting here now, breathing this breath? Or was it a version of me shaped by conditions that have already changed? You will begin to notice that the self you accuse is like a ghost, present only in memory, not in reality. Each moment births a new self, and clinging to the past self is like clinging to smoke. Understanding emptiness also transforms how you see others. Just as your mistakes do not define you, the mistakes of others do not define them. Holding resentment becomes harder when you see that no one is fixed in their errors. The person who hurt you is also a stream of conditions, changing moment by moment. This insight does not excuse harm, but it opens the possibility of compassion. It shows that no one is beyond change and that forgiveness is aligned with the very nature of reality. Many Buddhist stories illustrate this truth. Angulimala, a man who once killed many, was transformed by meeting the Buddha and became a monk. If mistakes were permanent, his life would have been forever condemned. Yet because conditions shifted through wisdom, compassion, and practice, he walked a new path. His story demonstrates that no matter how heavy the past, transformation is possible. If even a murderer could awaken, what mistake in your own life could truly be permanent? Emptiness also dissolves the fear that you are defined by your worst thoughts or feelings. Anger arises, but it is not you. It is a condition passing through. Jealousy arises, but it is not you. It is a ripple that fades. To see emptiness is to stop confusing temporary weather with the sky itself. You are not the storm of guilt or the cloud of shame. You are the open space in which these states arise and dissolve. And because that space is never stained by what passes through, forgiveness is not only possible, it is already present in your nature. This perspective changes how you live in the present. When you release the illusion of a permanent mistake, you stop defending, hiding, or performing to prove your worth. You no longer need to construct a perfect image to cover an old flaw. You can meet life with honesty, because you know your being is not defined by past errors. This honesty deepens your relationships, builds trust, and nurtures connection. Others sense the freedom in you and feel safe to show their own imperfections. Forgiveness ripples outward, softening not only your heart but the hearts around you. Meditation is a direct way to taste emptiness. When you sit and observe your breath, you see how thoughts arise and vanish. A memory of regret surfaces, then dissolves. An image of the past comes, then goes. If you watch long enough, you see there is no solid core holding these thoughts together. They are like beads on a string, but when you look for the string, it is not there. This insight breaks the illusion that mistakes are fixed in stone. They are simply passing mental formations, no different from clouds in the sky. This insight does not mean ignoring consequences. If your action hurts someone, the effect may still remain. But emptiness shows that even these effects are not fixed. They too change with time, with healing, with new conditions. A broken trust can slowly mend, a wound can scar and fade, a relationship can transform. To see emptiness is to see possibility where guilt sees only permanence. It encourages responsibility, not despair, because every condition you create now can shape a new outcome. On a personal level, emptiness frees you from self-hatred. Hatred clings to the idea of a fixed self that deserves punishment. But if the self is empty, who is there to hate? Who is there to condemn? Hatred dissolves into understanding, and understanding blooms into compassion. You see that your mistakes arose from ignorance, just as a child may stumble because they do not yet know how to walk. Would you hate the child for falling? Or would you help them rise and guide their steps? Seeing your own emptiness allows you to respond to yourself with the same compassion. Emptiness also reveals the futility of perfectionism. If there is no fixed self, then what is there to perfect? Every effort to polish your identity becomes like trying to sculpt water. Instead, the practice becomes one of flow, meeting each moment fully, without clinging to past definitions or future ideals. Forgiveness here is not an act of erasing, but of releasing, letting the current carry you forward without dragging anchors of guilt. When you begin to live this way, the fear of being permanently defined by the past melts. You see yourself as a river, not a rock. The river carries memories of what has flowed through, but it is never the same water twice. Each moment is fresh. Each breath is renewal. And in this renewal, forgiveness becomes not a task, but a natural expression of reality. The illusion of a permanent mistake is powerful because it speaks to the desire for certainty. The mind craves solid ground, even if that ground is self-condemnation. But Buddhism invites you to let go of that solidity and rest in the openness of emptiness. At first, this feels disorienting, even frightening, but soon it reveals itself as freedom. To be empty is to be unchained, unbound by labels, open to endless becoming. From this place, forgiveness ceases to be an effort. It is the recognition of truth. There is no fixed self to condemn, no permanent mistake to define you, only conditions rising and falling, always changing. What seemed like a life sentence becomes a passing shadow. What felt like a permanent scar becomes part of the story, but never the whole story. You are not the mistake. You are the space in which mistakes arise and dissolve. And as you walk further on this path, this insight prepares you for a new relationship with regret itself. Regret is no longer an enemy to be suppressed or a weight to be carried forever. It becomes a compass, pointing you gently toward wiser choices, reminding you of what matters. The next step on the journey is learning to see regret not as condemnation, but as guidance. And in that shift, another doorway to forgiveness opens wide. When emptiness loosens the grip of a permanent mistake, the heart finds room to breathe. Yet another question rises quietly. What do we do with the feeling that still lingers after a wrong choice? The tightness in the chest, the heaviness in the stomach, the voice that says, "I wish I had done differently." This is regret. For many, regret becomes a source of endless self-condemnation, a way of reliving the past and reinforcing guilt. But within Buddhist wisdom, regret is not a chain, it is a compass. Properly understood, regret is not meant to punish you. It is meant to guide you. The key is in how you meet regret. If you approach it with harshness, it quickly becomes shame, feeding the belief that you are broken. If you dismiss it carelessly, it dissolves into shamelessness, cutting you off from responsibility. But when regret is held with mindfulness, it reveals itself as insight. It shows you where you lost balance, where ignorance led you astray, where fear or anger shaped your choices. Regret then becomes a teacher, pointing you back toward awareness and compassion. Buddhism speaks often of right view, and regret plays a role in cultivating it. Right view means seeing things as they truly are, not through the fog of delusion. Regret is the echo of misalignment, the reminder that something in your choices was out of harmony with wisdom. When you feel regret, you are being given a signal. Instead of turning it inward as a weapon, you can let it point you outward toward correction. The pain of regret is a natural feedback, like the heat of a flame teaching you not to touch it again. The lesson is not, "You are unworthy," but "Learn from this, grow from this." This approach changes the entire relationship with your past. You no longer need to fear, regret, or run from it. You can meet it directly, breathe into it, and ask, "What is this showing me?" Regret then loses its sharp edge and becomes an ally. Each pang of regret is like a signpost saying, "Here is where compassion is needed. Here is where awareness was absent. Here is where you can do better." This does not mean clinging to the past, it means using the past as a map for the present. The Buddha often spoke of heedfulness, the careful attention that guards your actions. Regret supports heedfulness by keeping you awake to the results of what you do. Without regret, carelessness takes over, and you repeat harmful patterns blindly. With too much regret, you collapse into despair and paralyze yourself. But with balanced regret, you stay alert, learning with each step. It becomes the fuel of wiser choices, the reminder that every action matters. On a personal level, this shift can be transformative. When you make a mistake with someone you love, regret naturally arises. Instead of drowning in it, you can see it as a compass pointing toward reconciliation. You can apologize sincerely, not from guilt, but from recognition. You can act differently in the future, guided by the memory of how it felt to hurt and be hurt. Regret, in this way, strengthens relationships rather than destroying them. It builds integrity, because people sense that you learn and grow, rather than hide or deny. This same principle applies in the inner world. When you notice that harsh self-talk leads only to more suffering, regret can signal you to stop feeding those patterns. Instead of berating yourself for berating yourself, you pause and redirect. Regret then becomes a gentle alarm bell, a wake-up call that says, "This direction deepens pain, choose another." It is not about erasing the past, but about aligning your present with greater wisdom. Buddhist practice emphasizes mindfulness of cause and effect, and regret plays into this awareness. Each action creates conditions. Regret allows you to feel those conditions directly, so that you are less likely to repeat them. In this way, regret is not a punishment but a preventative. It is life's way of guiding you toward liberation. Without it, the same mistakes would cycle endlessly. With it, you see more clearly where freedom lies. There is also a profound compassion hidden in regret. To feel regret means you care. You care about the impact of your actions, about the suffering of others, about the alignment of your life with truth. Without regret, compassion has no ground. Regret, when held wisely, shows the heart is awake enough to feel. It is not a weakness, but a strength. It means you are connected, sensitive to life, willing to grow. The danger lies in confusing regret with guilt. Guilt says, "I am bad." Regret says, "That action brought pain." Guilt attacks your identity, regret guides your awareness. One imprisons you, the other liberates you. This distinction is vital for self-forgiveness. You can let regret speak without letting it become a permanent judgment. You can feel the pain of a wrong turn without labeling yourself as lost forever. Regret is the compass. It is never the prison guard. In practical terms, regret can be integrated through reflection. At the end of each day, Buddhist practitioners sometimes review their actions not to condemn themselves, but to notice where they strayed and where they acted skillfully. This gentle reflection allows regret to arise naturally where needed, and with it, the intention to adjust. The next day becomes an opportunity to walk more carefully, more compassionately. Over time, this practice shapes character, not through harshness but through steady learning. Another layer of wisdom arises when regret is linked with impermanence. The feeling of regret, like all emotions, arises and passes. It does not need to be resisted or clung to. By observing its impermanence, you prevent it from solidifying into shame. You feel it fully, learn from it, and let it dissolve. In this way, regret becomes like a wave. It moves you but does not drown you. In relationships, regret can become a source of strength when paired with humility. Admitting a mistake openly is not weakness, but courage. It shows a willingness to grow, to honor the connection more than the ego. When regret points you toward apology or amends, it becomes a bridge rather than a wall. And when others see you taking responsibility without collapsing into shame, they feel safer to do the same. Regret then creates not isolation, but intimacy. Regret also serves society at large. Communities that understand regret as a compass rather than punishment create spaces for real transformation. Instead of casting people out forever for mistakes, they guide them toward repair and growth. Justice becomes restorative rather than destructive. In this way, the Buddhist view of regret holds the seed of healing not just for individuals, but for the collective. The path of forgiveness is strengthened by this insight. When you forgive yourself, you are not denying regret. You are honoring its message while releasing its weight. You are saying, I see where I went wrong, and I choose differently now. Forgiveness is the moment when regret completes its task and no longer needs to hold you. It has pointed the way, and you have followed. The compass does not need to be clutched once the direction is clear. This way of holding regret also softens how you see the regrets of others. When someone harms you and later expresses regret, you can see it as a sign of their awakening, not merely as a performance of guilt. Their regret, like yours, can guide them toward change. This does not mean you must excuse harm or erase consequences, but it opens the door to reconciliation. You see them as human beings learning, not as fixed villains. Meditation on compassion deepens this understanding. When you sit with the pain of regret, you realize it is universal. Everyone has moments they wish they could undo. Everyone has words they wish they had not spoken, choices they wish they had not made. This recognition dissolves isolation. Regret becomes not a private prison but a shared experience, part of the fabric of being human, and in that shared fabric, forgiveness is woven naturally. The ultimate freedom comes when regret transforms fully into wisdom. The memory of pain becomes a source of clarity, a reminder that certain actions lead to suffering and others lead to peace. Regret is then no longer an enemy but an ally, a quiet guide walking beside you. Instead of fighting it or being crushed by it, you walk with it, learning step by step. This transformation does not happen overnight. It requires mindfulness, compassion, humility, and patience. But with practice, the shift becomes steady. You no longer dread regret, because you know its purpose. You meet it with openness, let it teach you, and let it go. In this way, regret becomes part of the path to liberation, one more teacher in the great unfolding of your life. And as this teacher fades into the background, another lesson emerges. If regret can guide without condemning, then mistakes themselves can be seen not as failures, but as opportunities for wisdom. What once felt like falling short can be reframed as part of the journey. This leads naturally into the next step, discovering how so-called mistakes can themselves be skillful means, hidden teachers on the path of awakening. When regret is no longer a chain but a compass, the way you see mistakes themselves begins to shift. They stop appearing as dead ends and start revealing themselves as hidden pathways. What once felt like failure becomes something else entirely, a lesson wrapped in disguise, a teacher that speaks through pain and disappointment. In Buddhism, this is known as skillful means, the idea that even the most difficult moments can be turned into tools for awakening when held with wisdom. Instead of burying your mistakes or cursing them, you learn to work with them, to transform them into stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks. Skillful means is rooted in the recognition that wisdom does not always come from smooth roads. Often, the very situations you wish had never happened contain the seeds of your deepest insight. When you look back at your life, you may find that the times you grew most were not when everything went right, but when things fell apart. It is through mistakes that humility blossoms, compassion deepens, and awareness sharpens. To redefine mistakes as teachers is to reclaim your past as a source of strength rather than a weight of shame. The Buddha himself used the concept of skillful means to teach. He did not offer one rigid path for all, but adjusted his teachings to meet people where they were. Sometimes he used parables, sometimes silence, sometimes even deliberate challenges that appeared confusing but were designed to spark insight. In the same way, mistakes can function as skillful means within your own life. Though not intended in the same deliberate way as the Buddha's teaching, they can still serve the same function, to wake you up. This perspective shifts the emotional tone of self-reflection. Instead of seeing failure as evidence of your unworthiness, you begin to ask, what is this teaching me? A harsh word spoken in anger may show you the depth of your unhealed wounds. A wrong decision at work may reveal where you ignored intuition. A broken relationship may teach you the necessity of honesty and presence. These are not punishments, but invitations to grow. The pain of the mistake is not the end, it is the doorway. To approach mistakes this way requires courage. The natural impulse is to look away, to cover them with excuses or sink into shame. But courage means facing them directly, without judgment, with the willingness to learn. This is not easy, yet it is liberating. Each time you turn toward a mistake with openness, you disarm its power. It ceases to be a wound that festers and becomes a lesson that heals. Skillful means also teaches adaptability. Life rarely follows the script you write for it. Plans unravel, intentions backfire, and outcomes surprise you. To hold mistakes as teachers is to remain flexible, to see that even when things go wrong, they can still serve the path. This flexibility is itself a form of wisdom. It loosens your grip on control and deepens your trust in the unfolding of life. What feels like detour may, in hindsight, be the very road that brought you where you needed to go. On a practical level, you can apply this by reframing. When a mistake arises, instead of asking, "Why did I fail?" you ask, "What is life showing me here?" This question shifts your perspective from condemnation to curiosity. Curiosity opens the door to insight, while condemnation slams it shut. By cultivating curiosity, you turn mistakes into mirrors that reflect where growth is needed. In relationships, this reframing can heal connections. A conflict that once felt destructive can become the catalyst for deeper intimacy if you learn from it. For example, realizing that you have been defensive in arguments may teach you the value of listening more deeply. The mistake of shutting down emotionally can reveal the necessity of vulnerability. When both people approach conflict with this attitude, even the most painful exchanges can become opportunities for stronger bonds. Skillful means also transforms how you teach and guide others. When you see your own mistakes as teachers, you stop hiding them and start sharing them honestly. Your vulnerability becomes a gift, showing others that failure is not the end but part of the path. This honesty dissolves perfectionism and builds authentic trust. People are inspired not by flawless examples but by real ones, those who fall and rise, learn, and keep going. Your mistakes, shared with humility, become lessons that ripple outward. This perspective also guards against arrogance. Success can easily inflate the ego, but mistakes bring you back to humility. They remind you that you are human, that you are learning, that you are not above others. This humility is precious. It grounds you, makes you compassionate, and keeps you open to continual growth. Without mistakes, the ego might harden into rigidity. With them, the heart softens into understanding. Another dimension of skillful means is patience. A mistake often carries lessons that take time to unfold. You may not see the teaching immediately. In the moment, all you may feel is pain or confusion. But with time and reflection, the insight emerges. Looking back years later, you may recognize that what felt like failure was in fact the turning point. Trusting this process requires patience, the willingness to let understanding ripen in its own time. Meditation helps cultivate this perspective. On the cushion, you inevitably encounter distraction. The mind wanders, and at first you may call this a mistake. But with guidance, you learn that even distraction is part of the practice. Each time you notice it, you return to the breath. The wandering becomes the very means of training attention. What seemed like failure is revealed as teacher. This small lesson mirrors the larger truth. Every mistake contains the seed of growth if you approach it with mindfulness. Seeing mistakes as teachers also liberates creativity. Fear of failure stifles innovation, but when you embrace mistakes as part of the process, you become free to explore. Artists, inventors, and thinkers across history testify that their greatest breakthroughs often came through errors. In spiritual practice, the same principle applies. Each stumble is a chance to refine, each misstep a chance to adjust. The path is not a straight line but a spiral, and mistakes are what deepen the spiral into wisdom. Compassion is the soil in which this transformation grows. Without compassion, mistakes remain wounds. With compassion, they heal into wisdom. Compassion allows you to hold the pain of error without turning it into self-hatred. It lets you see that the mistake arose from conditions, that you acted as best you could with the awareness you had at the time. This does not excuse harm but contextualizes it, making space for growth. Compassion then extends outward, helping you see the mistakes of others with the same softness. The power of redefining mistakes lies in freedom. When you no longer see them as threats to your worth, you stop living in fear. You are free to try, to risk, to act with sincerity. Failure may come, but it no longer defines you, it teaches you. This freedom is the ground of forgiveness. You forgive yourself not by erasing mistakes but by honoring their role in your journey. They are no longer chains but stepping stones. Even the heaviest mistakes carry this potential. In Buddhist history, figures who committed grave harm still found awakening. Their transformation demonstrates that no mistake is beyond redemption. The greater the fall, the greater the possibility for awakening when the lesson is embraced. This truth dissolves despair. No matter what has happened, the path remains open. Living with this perspective creates a life of resilience. You meet setbacks not with collapse, but with curiosity. You meet failure not with despair, but with openness. Every turn of the road, no matter how painful, becomes part of the unfolding path. Life ceases to be a fragile structure threatened by mistakes and becomes a dynamic process enriched by them. In this way, mistakes reveal their true nature as teachers. They are not obstacles to awakening, but essential parts of it. Each one deepens humility, compassion, and awareness. Each one shapes you into someone more present, more real, more awake. To redefine mistakes as teachers is to embrace the whole of life as a field of practice where nothing is wasted and everything is usable on the path to freedom. When mistakes are reframed as teachers, a door opens to resilience, growth, and compassion. Yet, even with this understanding, many still carry a heavy burden that lingers quietly in the background, the story of identity built around failure. It is not the single error that wounds the most, but the ongoing narrative that says, "This is who I am." The story repeats in the mind like a haunting refrain, turning one event into a lifelong definition. To be free, it is not enough to learn from mistakes. You must release the identity story itself. Identity stories are powerful because they offer a sense of certainty. The human mind craves coherence and seeks to organize scattered experiences into a fixed tale. I am the one who always disappoints. I am the one who can never get it right. These stories are stitched together from fragments of memory, often without questioning whether they truly reflect reality. Over time, they become cages, shaping how you see yourself and how you act. When you meet new challenges, you no longer respond freshly, you respond through the lens of the old story. Buddhism offers a radical liberation here by pointing to the emptiness of self. The stories you tell are not truth, but constructions. They are woven from memory, perception, and interpretation, none of which are permanent or reliable. The self you condemn today is not the same self who made a mistake years ago, yet the story makes it feel as if the past is carved into your very being. The Dharma invites you to loosen this grip, to see that the narrative is just that, a narrative. It is not your essence. Non-attachment to identity stories does not mean erasing memory or denying responsibility. It means meeting the past without clinging to it as who you are. You can acknowledge what happened, even learn deeply from it, without turning it into a permanent definition. The phrase, "I failed," describes a moment. The phrase, "I am a failure," constructs a prison. Non-attachment is the art of keeping the moment as it is a passing event without solidifying it into a lifelong label. This shift transforms daily life. When you hold tightly to identity stories, every experience becomes filtered. If you see yourself as the one who failed, even small successes feel like temporary accidents rather than reflections of growth. Praise feels undeserved, opportunities feel dangerous, and risks feel impossible. By releasing the story, you meet each experience with openness, unburdened by the past. Success can be enjoyed without suspicion, and challenges can be faced without dread. Meditation reveals this truth directly. When you sit and watch your mind, you notice thoughts arise like clouds. One thought may say, "I am worthless." Another may say, "I can't change." But when you observe closely, you see these are not permanent truths. They are momentary formations. They arise, linger, and pass. The identity story loses its solidity under the light of awareness. It is no more fixed than a breeze. With practice, you stop believing every thought that appears. You see them as movements of mind, not declarations of reality. The stories you carry are often inherited as well. Family, culture, and society feed narratives into you from childhood. You may carry the voice of a parent who said you would never amount to anything, or the echo of a teacher who marked you as inadequate. These voices shape identity stories long before you are old enough to question them. Non-attachment means recognizing that these are not your essence but external imprints. They are conditions, not truths. By seeing them as inherited, you loosen their hold. This insight fosters compassion. If your identity stories are not solid, then neither are those of others. When someone around you says, "I am hopeless," or "I am broken," you can see the narrative for what it is: a construction shaped by pain and conditioning. You can meet them not as a fixed identity, but as a fluid being, always capable of change. And as you see others this way, you reinforce the same compassion for yourself. Non-attachment to identity stories also opens the door to creativity. Stories limit possibility. If you tell yourself, "I am not the kind of person who can lead," you never attempt leadership. If you say, "I am the one who always ruins things," you avoid risks that might bring growth. Releasing the story frees you to step into new roles, to try new paths, to live more fully. Identity becomes fluid, adaptable, open. You are not chained to the past. You are alive in the present, capable of endless becoming. This does not mean you deny patterns. Habits exist, tendencies exist, but they are not destiny. A habit is a groove, not a definition. With awareness, grooves can be reshaped. By practicing new ways of thinking and acting, you carve fresh patterns into the mind. Over time, the old story fades, and a new openness takes root. Non-attachment is the trust that change is possible because nothing in your being is fixed. Buddhist teachings often use the metaphor of a raft. The Dharma itself is described as a raft used to cross a river. Once across, you do not carry the raft on your back, you leave it behind. Identity stories are like heavy rafts built out of memory and guilt. You may have used them once to make sense of your life, but to carry them forever only weighs you down. Letting go is not abandonment of responsibility, it is the refusal to drag unnecessary weight when you are free to walk forward. The practice of mindfulness in speech can also dissolve identity stories. Each time you catch yourself saying, "I am always this way," or "I can never do that," pause. Notice the story embedded in the words. Ask whether it reflects the present truth or a past label. By becoming conscious of language, you weaken the automatic repetition of the story. Slowly, the grip loosens, and you create space for new expressions of self. Forgiveness deepens when identity stories are released. If you are not defined by your worst mistake, then forgiveness is not about erasing who you are, but about seeing who you truly are beyond the story. Forgiveness becomes a recognition of impermanence, that the self who acted then is not the self here now. This recognition brings a softening, a willingness to let go, a freedom to move forward without dragging the weight of identity. The release of stories also cultivates humility. Identity, whether negative or positive, tends to harden into rigidity. "I am the successful one" can become as confining as "I am the failure." Both are prisons because they bind you to a role. Non-attachment frees you from both. You can succeed without clinging to the label, fail without clinging to the shame. Life becomes fluid, lived moment to moment, rather than trapped in narrative. This fluidity is not emptiness in the sense of nothingness, it is fullness in the sense of freedom. You are no longer reduced to a single storyline, but open to countless possibilities. Each breath is a chance to begin again, unshackled from the past. Each moment is fresh, the identity story dissolves, and in its place is a living being, dynamic, responsive, alive. From this perspective, even painful memories lose their sting. They are acknowledged, learned from, and released. They no longer feed the story of who you are. Instead, they become chapters in a book that continues to unfold, but never the final chapter. You are always in motion, always becoming, never fixed. And as this understanding deepens, the self that once clung to failure begins to dissolve. The weight of being the one who failed lifts, replaced by the lightness of being a changing, evolving presence. With this freedom, the heart becomes more open and compassion flows more naturally. The next step is learning how to apply this compassion inward as deliberately as outward, to treat yourself with the same care that the Bodhisattva vow extends to all beings. When the grip of identity stories loosens, the heart becomes lighter, yet a deeper challenge arises. You may release the old narratives, but do you know how to treat yourself with the tenderness you so freely extend to others? Many walk the path of compassion outwardly, offering patience, forgiveness, and understanding to friends, family, even strangers, but turn inward with harshness and neglect. The Bodhisattva vow, often spoken of as a promise to save all beings from suffering, also points to the self. To live fully, you must recognize that you, too, are a being worthy of liberation. Extending compassion inward is not indulgence. It is wisdom, because without caring for yourself, your compassion for others remains incomplete. The Bodhisattva embodies boundless compassion, a willingness to walk into the suffering of the world with courage and love. Yet many forget that this same vow must be applied inward, or else it becomes unbalanced. If you refuse kindness to yourself, you reinforce the very suffering you wish to heal. You become like a candle lighting others while slowly burning out. True compassion is not selective, it includes every being, and you are one of them. Treating yourself with bodhisattva compassion begins with acknowledging your own suffering. Often, people dismiss their pain as unimportant compared to the suffering of others. They think, others have it worse, so I should not complain. But this mindset denies reality. Pain is pain, and it deserves to be seen. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering is universal, not to be ranked or minimized. To acknowledge your pain is not to magnify it, but to meet it honestly. Compassion begins here, with the courage to say, I too am suffering, and I too deserve care. This inward compassion transforms how you relate to mistakes and regrets. Instead of punishing yourself endlessly, you respond with the same tenderness you would offer a loved one. If a friend came to you in despair, you would not tell them they are worthless or unredeemable. You would listen, comfort, and guide them gently toward healing. The bodhisattva within invites you to do the same for yourself. Each harsh word you speak inwardly can be replaced with a softer one. Each act of self-neglect can be replaced with care. This is not weakness. It is alignment with truth. The practice of metta, or loving kindness meditation, supports this transformation. Traditionally, practitioners send wishes of peace and happiness to others, but the sequence always begins with the self. May I be free from suffering. May I be at peace. These words may feel awkward at first, especially if you are used to self-criticism. But over time, they reshape the inner dialogue. The inner voice softens, and compassion toward yourself becomes natural. This practice is not selfish. It is the foundation for extending genuine kindness to others. Without it, outward compassion risks becoming hollow or performative. The bodhisattva path is not about ignoring your own liberation while serving others. It is about recognizing that your liberation and theirs are intertwined. When you are gentle with yourself, you become more present, more patient, and more resilient for those around you. When you forgive yourself, you model forgiveness for others. When you nurture your own healing, you contribute to the healing of the collective. Compassion for the self and compassion for the world are not two paths, but one. Self-compassion also dismantles the subtle arrogance hidden in self-condemnation. Many believe harshness toward themselves is a form of humility, but in truth, it is another way of clinging to ego. By insisting you are uniquely unworthy, you separate yourself from the shared human condition. The bodhisattva path dissolves this illusion by reminding you that your suffering is not special, it is part of the vast ocean of human struggle. To treat yourself kindly is to honor this interconnectedness, to step into the humility of belonging. In practice, Extending bodhisattva compassion inward requires mindfulness. Notice the moments when your inner voice sharpens into cruelty. Notice the habits of pushing yourself past exhaustion, of dismissing your needs, of holding yourself to standards no one could meet. These are signs that compassion has been cut off. Instead of ignoring them, pause. Ask, what would compassion look like in this moment? Sometimes it is rest, sometimes it is a kind word, sometimes it is patience with your own pace of growth. Small acts, repeated often, become the ground of transformation. The teachings of interbeing, emphasized by Thich Nhat Hanh, further illuminate this practice. You are not separate from the world. Your smile contributes to the peace of others. Your suffering adds to the weight of the collective. To heal yourself is to contribute to healing the world. This perspective dissolves the false separation between self-compassion and compassion for others. The Bodhisattva vow, when applied inward, becomes a commitment to care for the whole through caring for the part. Forgiveness is one of the deepest expressions of this inward compassion. To forgive yourself is to release the chains of guilt, not because the past did not matter, but because you deserve to move forward. The Bodhisattva vow calls you to liberation, and liberation cannot be reached while shackled to endless self-punishment. Forgiveness is not denial but recognition. You see clearly the conditions that led to your actions, and you choose compassion as the path beyond them. This act of forgiveness is both personal and universal, because it strengthens your capacity to forgive others. Self-compassion also prepares you to face suffering with steadiness. Without it, the weight of pain becomes unbearable, and the desire to numb or escape grows stronger. With it, you can hold suffering gently, like a mother holding a crying child. You do not need to fix everything instantly, you simply need to be present. This presence is itself healing. It allows the waves of pain to rise and fall without drowning you. By practicing this with yourself, you become capable of offering it to others as well. This path is not always easy. Old habits of self-criticism return, and the mind resists softness. But persistence matters. Each moment of self-compassion plants a seed. Over time, these seeds grow into an inner landscape of kindness. The harsh desert of self-condemnation slowly blooms into a garden of care. The Bodhisattva vow, applied inward, is not fulfilled in a single act, but in the steady cultivation of this garden. When you begin to live this way, the sense of unworthiness that once clung so tightly starts to dissolve. You feel more at ease, more connected, more alive, and this ease radiates outward. Those around you notice your gentleness, your patience, your authenticity. Your compassion becomes contagious, inspiring others to treat themselves with the same care. This ripple effect fulfills the Bodhisattva vow in the most profound way: liberation through compassion, beginning with yourself. When compassion toward yourself begins to take root, the mind starts to soften and the heart feels less heavy. Yet even with this tenderness, one shadow often lingers: guilt. It creeps in quietly, even after you've learned to forgive, whispering that you should not let go so easily, that you must continue to carry the burden to prove you care. Guilt disguises itself as responsibility, but in truth, it becomes another chain. To be free, you must see guilt clearly, not as an eternal mark on the soul, but as a passing phenomenon, something that arises, lingers for a time, and naturally dissolves when not grasped. Buddhism teaches impermanence as one of the central truths of life. Everything changes: the body, emotions, thoughts, seasons, relationships, even mountains and rivers. Nothing stays fixed. When applied to guilt, this truth transforms the way you experience it. Guilt is not a permanent stain, it is a mental state born from conditions. When those conditions shift, guilt too shifts. The heaviness you feel today is not destined to last forever. It is like weather. It comes, it passes, it clears. The suffering arises not because guilt exists, but because you cling to it as if it defines you. To recognize the impermanence of guilt is to stop fearing it. So often, people resist guilt or attempt to bury it, thinking if they let it surface, it will stay forever. But when guilt is allowed to be seen with mindfulness, it reveals its true nature: temporary, unstable, dissolving. By observing guilt without judgment, you notice its rise in the body, the tightening chest, the sinking stomach, the restless thoughts, and then you watch as these sensations shift. Nothing remains static. What seemed like an eternal weight becomes a passing wave. This shift is essential for self-forgiveness. When you believe guilt is permanent, you treat it like a life sentence. You carry it endlessly, repeating the same self-punishment, afraid that letting it go would mean dismissing the harm caused. But impermanence shows a different truth. Guilt, like pain, serves as feedback. It appears, it teaches, and then it is meant to move on. Clinging to guilt long after the lesson has been learned does not deepen wisdom, it only prolongs suffering. Meditation offers a direct way to experience this. When sitting in silence, guilt often arises uninvited. At first it feels overwhelming, but if you stay present, you notice how it shifts, first intense, then softer, then perhaps replaced by another thought or feeling. This experience teaches you that guilt is not a solid block but a process. You are not trapped inside it, you are the awareness in which it moves. Seeing this breaks the illusion of permanence and opens the possibility of release. Understanding impermanence does not mean ignoring consequences. The effects of harmful actions may linger, just as waves ripple long after a stone is thrown. But even these effects are not fixed. Trust can be rebuilt, wounds can heal, relationships can transform. Guilt is only useful insofar as it guides you to create better conditions for the future. Beyond that, it loses its purpose. Holding on to guilt indefinitely is like holding onto a warning bell long after the fire has been put out. It only keeps you trapped in noise. Impermanence also reminds you that your very sense of self is always changing. The person who acted in ignorance is not the same person who now feels regret. Growth itself proves that guilt cannot be permanent. If you were truly fixed in your past mistake, transformation would be impossible. But each moment is new, each breath reshapes who you are. To cling to guilt is to deny this unfolding reality. Letting go honors the truth that you are not static, but always becoming. In relationships, this insight brings healing. When someone close to you continues to punish themselves with guilt, you may feel the weight of it in the connection. But when guilt is seen as impermanent, both you and they can breathe. The relationship is no longer frozen in the past, but free to move forward. Guilt, when clung to, isolates. When released, it allows closeness to return. Compassion flows more easily when neither side insists on holding chains that no longer serve. This view also protects against the trap of false virtue. Some believe carrying guilt indefinitely proves moral depth, as though suffering endlessly makes them more responsible. But Buddhism shows that true virtue lies not in self-punishment, but in awakening. To let go of guilt is not to excuse harm, but to embody wisdom. By releasing guilt, you free energy for compassion, creativity, and service. Endless guilt benefits no one. Transformed insight benefits everyone. Mindfulness of impermanence also nurtures patience. When guilt arises, you may long for it to vanish instantly. But just as wounds take time to heal, emotions take time to dissolve. Patience allows you to sit with guilt without panic, trusting its temporary nature. Each time it resurfaces, you recognize it for what it is: a wave, not the ocean. Over time, this recognition weakens its grip until guilt passes more quickly, leaving behind the clarity of understanding. There is also great freedom in realizing that even the memory of guilt changes. Neuroscience confirms what Buddhism has long taught. Memory is not fixed. Each time you recall an event, the mind reshapes it. The story you tell about your mistake today is not the exact story you told years ago. This malleability shows that guilt is not a solid truth but a fluid narrative. By practicing mindfulness, you can reshape that narrative toward growth instead of punishment. Forgiveness becomes natural in this light. If guilt is impermanent, you need not fear that releasing it means abandoning responsibility. Responsibility is ongoing, guilt is temporary. You can hold responsibility in the present, choosing wiser actions, cultivating compassion without dragging guilt from the past into every step. This distinction allows you to walk with integrity while freeing yourself from unnecessary suffering. Impermanence also softens how you see the guilt of others. Just as your own guilt shifts and dissolves, so too does theirs. No one is forever defined by the heaviness of regret. When you remember this, you meet others with patience rather than judgment. You trust that their process, like yours, is unfolding moment by moment. Compassion replaces condemnation because you see that guilt is not a permanent condition but a passing visitor. Practices of reflection can support this perspective. At the end of each day, instead of replaying guilt endlessly, you can review your actions, note where regret arises, learn the lesson, and release it. This ritual honors guilt's role as teacher without allowing it to harden into identity. You take what is useful and let the rest go. Over time, this practice creates a lighter, freer relationship with your own mind. The teaching of impermanence does not ask you to deny guilt, but to place it in context. It arises, like all mental states, shaped by causes and conditions. It lingers as long as those conditions remain, and it passes when conditions shift. This is the natural law of existence. To see this clearly is to loosen the chains of self-condemnation. You no longer treat guilt as eternal truth, but as a fleeting phenomenon, one more wave in the ocean of mind. With this clarity, life begins to open again. The energy once consumed by guilt becomes available for healing, for creativity, for love. You learn to walk more lightly, carrying lessons but not chains. Forgiveness ceases to be an effortful task and becomes a natural expression of wisdom. Guilt loses its power because you no longer mistake it for permanence. It comes, it teaches, it goes. And in that release, you begin to sense the possibility of living moment to moment with greater presence. If guilt itself is impermanent, then so too is every form of self-criticism and every inner storm. This insight prepares you for a deeper practice, meeting each moment with breath, using the simplicity of awareness as a radical reset, where the past loosens its hold and the present becomes enough. When the truth of impermanence reveals that guilt does not last forever, the question arises, how do you return to that truth in the very moments when guilt or self-criticism feels overwhelming? Knowing that guilt passes is wisdom, but experiencing it as it passes is practice. The bridge between knowing and experiencing is the breath. Breathing becomes more than a biological act. It becomes a radical reset, a way of returning to presence, letting go of harsh inner voices and reclaiming clarity moment by moment. The breath is simple, always available, yet profoundly transformative. While thoughts spiral endlessly and emotions rise like storms, the breath is steady, neutral, and grounding. It does not judge, it does not condemn, it simply flows in and out. By turning attention to the breath, you step out of the tangle of self-criticism and into direct contact with life as it is. This is not an escape, but a return. A reminder that beneath all mental noise there is a place of stillness you can touch at any time. Breath meditation is the practice of noticing the inhale and the exhale over and over again. Each cycle becomes an anchor to the present. When the mind drifts into guilt, you gently return to the breath. When the voice of self-criticism grows loud, you soften back into the rhythm of inhaling and exhaling. This repetition rewires the relationship with your thoughts. Instead of being trapped inside them, you see them as passing events, no more permanent than the rise and fall of the chest. Breathing as a radical reset works because the breath is always now. Self-criticism lives in the past, and future it reminds you of what you did wrong or warns you of what you will ruin. The breath pulls you into the immediacy of this moment where those accusations cannot survive. Every inhale affirms life, every exhale releases what is no longer needed. To focus on the breath is to declare, "This moment is enough." In this space, guilt loosens and forgiveness begins. On a physical level, mindful breathing soothes the nervous system. Self-criticism activates the body's stress response. The heart races, muscles tighten, thoughts speed up. By slowing and deepening the breath, you shift the body into calmness. The parasympathetic system activates, heart rate steadies, muscles soften, clarity returns. This physiological change supports the mental shift, proving that breath is not symbolic but practical medicine for the mind. Breathing also teaches patience. Inhale follows exhale naturally. You cannot rush it without strain. The rhythm of breath becomes a model for how to meet yourself. Steady, patient, unforced. Each cycle teaches that letting go is natural. No matter how much air you hold, you cannot keep it forever. In the same way, no matter how tightly you cling to guilt or self-criticism, they will pass when you allow them. The breath shows you impermanence directly, not as an idea but as an experience. Self-criticism thrives on identification. You believe the harsh voice is you. Breath meditation interrupts this identification. By focusing on the simple act of inhaling and exhaling, you create space between awareness and thought. You begin to notice, here is the breath, and here is the thought of, I am worthless. The two are not the same. You are the one noticing both. This gap is freedom. It shows that you are not your self-criticism, but the awareness in which it arises and fades. Breath meditation also nurtures gentleness. Harshness cannot survive long when met with steady, calm breathing. Each inhale becomes an act of receiving care. Each exhale becomes an act of letting go of harm. Over time, this rhythm reshapes the inner dialogue. The voice of judgment softens, replaced by a more compassionate tone. Breathing becomes not just a practice but a language of kindness spoken silently to yourself. This practice does not require special conditions. You can return to the breath anywhere while walking, working, or lying awake at night. The accessibility of breath makes it a constant refuge. No matter where guilt arises, the reset is available. This immediacy is what makes breathing radical. It bypasses elaborate rituals and takes you directly to the heart of presence. Each cycle is enough to begin again. In relationships, using breath as a reset prevents cycles of conflict. When self-criticism spills into defensiveness or blame, pausing to breathe interrupts the pattern. The breath steadies the mind, allowing you to respond rather than react. This pause may seem small, but it changes everything. Instead of words spoken in haste, you find words rooted in awareness. Instead of repeating old patterns, you create new possibilities. Breathing also teaches humility. You cannot control every aspect of it. At times, the breath feels smooth, at times shallow, at times labored. By accepting it as it is, you practice acceptance of yourself. Just as you do not condemn the breath for being uneven, you learn not to condemn yourself for being imperfect. Each inhale becomes an act of receiving life as it comes, each exhale an act of releasing the need for control. There is a spiritual depth to breath meditation that connects you to the essence of Buddhist practice. The Buddha himself taught mindfulness of breathing as a foundational practice because in the breath lies the whole of the path. Impermanence, presence, compassion, and liberation. By returning to the breath, you return to the ground of awakening. Every cycle becomes a step toward freedom. Breathing as a radical reset also dissolves the illusion of permanence in emotions. Just as each breath comes and goes, so too do thoughts and feelings. When self-criticism arises, you witness it like an exhale, intense for a moment, then gone. When peace arises, you hold it lightly, knowing it too will pass. This perspective prevents clinging and aversion, creating balance. The breath trains the mind to meet all experiences equally, with equanimity. Forgiveness deepens through this practice. Each breath becomes a small act of release, a letting go of self-condemnation. Over time, these small acts accumulate into transformation. You stop carrying guilt as if it were permanent and start releasing it moment by moment. Forgiveness is no longer a single dramatic act, but a continuous practice woven into the rhythm of life. Breath also connects you to the body, anchoring you in physical presence. Self-criticism often pulls you into abstraction, into stories about who you are and what you should be. By feeling the breath in the belly, the chest, the nostrils, you return to embodiment. This grounds you, reminding you that you are more than your thoughts. You are a living being, breathing, present, alive. Over time, breath meditation cultivates resilience. Life will still bring mistakes, regrets, and criticism. But with each inhale and exhale, you build the capacity to reset, to begin again without being crushed. Resilience is not the absence of struggle, but the ability to return, again and again, to presence. The breath embodies this perfectly. No matter how many times it is interrupted, it always returns. The practice of breath as reset also strengthens compassion for others. When you learn to soften your own self-criticism through breathing, you naturally extend the same gentleness outward. You become less reactive, more patient, more understanding. The same breath that steadies you becomes a gift to those around you, because your presence becomes calmer and kinder. The radical nature of this practice lies in its simplicity. While the mind complicates forgiveness with endless stories, the breath cuts through directly. Inhale, exhale, begin again. Each cycle is both ordinary and profound. Each cycle is a reminder that no mistake, no guilt, no criticism is more permanent than a single breath. Living this way transforms your relationship with yourself. Self-forgiveness ceases to be an abstract goal and becomes a lived reality, practiced with every inhale and exhale. The breath shows you that renewal is always possible, that the present is always fresh. By trusting this truth, you carry less weight, respond with more love, and walk more lightly on the path. And as you deepen into this practice, another doorway opens. If breath can reset the mind moment by moment, silence itself can become a sanctuary, a space where the voices of self-criticism dissolve completely, leaving only the clarity of awareness. When the breath becomes a constant reminder that renewal is always possible, a subtler refuge begins to reveal itself. Beneath even the rhythm of inhale and exhale lies a deeper stillness, a place where the voices of judgment no longer echo and the weight of self-criticism cannot survive. This is silence, not the mere absence of sound, but a mindful turning inward where accusations fade and the heart rests without defense. Silence, when embraced with awareness, becomes not emptiness but medicine, a form of self-forgiveness that heals in ways words never could. Silence is often misunderstood. Many associate it with loneliness or suppression, a space where unresolved pain grows louder. But in Buddhist practice, silence is not about shutting down. It is about listening more deeply. It is an opening, not a closing. By stepping into silence with mindfulness, you discover that the inner noise of guilt and accusation loses its grip. Thoughts continue to arise, but without the constant fuel of outward distraction, they reveal their fleeting nature. In this clarity, self-forgiveness begins to unfold naturally. Self-criticism thrives on constant mental chatter. The inner voice repeats its judgments endlessly, reinforcing the story of failure. But silence interrupts this cycle. In silence, you no longer argue with the voice, nor obey it, nor drown it out with distractions. You simply let it speak into the vastness of stillness, where it loses its authority. Like a shout echoing into a canyon, the criticism fades into nothing. Silence does not fight the voice, it dissolves it. Withdrawing into mindful silence also exposes the subtle layers of suffering you may not notice in daily busyness. The constant activity of modern life, work, conversations, screens, keeps you from hearing the undercurrent of pain within. Silence strips away the distractions, allowing you to meet yourself honestly. This honesty is not cruelty, it is compassion. Only by seeing your wounds clearly can you begin to forgive them. Silence becomes the space where the truth of your humanity is revealed and accepted. Silence is forgiving because it is impartial. It does not judge your past, your choices, or your regrets. It simply holds everything as it is. When you rest in silence, you rest in a field that welcomes both your light and your shadows without preference. This unconditional acceptance is what self-forgiveness requires. Words can often add layers of defense or justification, but silence bypasses all of that. It places you directly in the presence of being, where nothing needs to be fixed before it is worthy of rest. The practice of mindful silence can take many forms. It may be a formal meditation retreat, where you spend days or weeks in noble silence, observing the mind without speech. It may be a daily practice of sitting quietly, allowing thoughts to pass without clinging. It may even be a few moments of pause during the day, stepping away from noise to simply be. What matters is not the length, but the sincerity. Each moment of silence is a gift of space, where forgiveness can breathe. Silence also nurtures humility. In silence, the ego has less room to perform. You are not constructing an image for others or defending yourself through words. You are simply present, stripped of masks. This humility is gentle. It reminds you that you do not need to prove anything to be worthy of compassion. Forgiveness arises here, in the recognition that worth is not earned by performance but inherent in being. Another gift of silence is perspective. In daily noise, problems appear overwhelming. But in silence, distance grows, and the storms of thought are seen for what they are: temporary weather in the mind. What felt permanent softens, what felt unbearable lightens. This shift in perspective allows you to forgive yourself more easily, because you no longer mistake passing emotions for eternal truths. Silence teaches you that everything moves, even your harshest judgments. Silence also strengthens presence. Guilt pulls you into the past, shame keeps you reliving old stories, and anxiety pushes you into the future. But silence anchors you here, in the immediacy of now. When you rest in silence, you realize that in this moment, you are whole. The past cannot touch you here, nor can the future. In this presence, forgiveness becomes less about effort and more about recognition. You are already free when you stop clinging to the noise. In relationships, silence deepens connection, not only with yourself, but with others. When you cultivate silence inwardly, you listen more fully. You stop interrupting with your judgments and begin to hear the truth of another person's experience. This deep listening extends naturally to yourself as well. By listening silently to your own heart, you acknowledge its pain without dismissal. Forgiveness flows from this listening, because to be heard fully is to be healed. Silence also reveals the illusion of separation. When the chatter quiets, you sense a deeper connection to life itself. You feel part of the vastness, no longer isolated by your stories. In this spaciousness, guilt loses its power. The small self that clings to failure dissolves into a larger awareness that holds everything without blame. Forgiveness here is not something you do. It is something that happens naturally when the boundaries of self soften. On a practical level, integrating silence into life requires intention. In a world that glorifies constant communication, choosing silence can feel unnatural. But even a few minutes of mindful quiet each day can reshape the relationship with yourself. Start with small practices. Turn off devices, sit quietly, breathe, listen. Over time, you may seek longer periods of silence, not as escape, but as nourishment. Each pause becomes an act of forgiveness, because it interrupts the endless repetition of self-condemnation. Silence also reminds you of impermanence. When you sit in stillness, you notice sounds arise and fade, the hum of traffic, the chirping of a bird, the beating of your heart. Everything comes and goes. This same impermanence applies to guilt and self-criticism. They too arise and pass. Silence makes this truth experiential. You no longer need to believe intellectually that judgments are temporary. You feel their rise and fall directly in the stillness of awareness. There is a subtle beauty in silence that words cannot capture. It is the beauty of simply being without need for defense or improvement. When you rest here, forgiveness becomes effortless. You see that you are not the sum of mistakes, not the endless critic, but the awareness that holds all of it. In this awareness, there is no need for punishment. There is only the spaciousness of acceptance. Living with mindful silence as a practice does not mean retreating forever from the world. It means carrying the quality of silence into daily life, speaking with awareness, listening deeply, acting without the constant noise of inner judgment. The silence you cultivate within becomes a resource you draw upon in every moment. When criticism arises, you return to silence. When guilt resurfaces, you rest in stillness. Forgiveness is no longer distant but present, alive in the quiet space you carry everywhere. Over time, silence reshapes your identity. Instead of being the person defined by mistakes, you become the person who knows stillness. This identity is not rigid but fluid, because silence does not cling to stories. It holds everything lightly, letting it come and go. In this way, silence becomes both teacher and healer. It dissolves accusations not by fighting them, but by revealing their insubstantial nature. Silence as self-forgiveness is profound because it returns you to what has always been whole. Beneath the chatter, beneath the noise, beneath the guilt, there is a silence that has never been harmed. To rest here is to forgive by remembering who you truly are, not the mistakes, not the critic, but the awareness vast enough to hold it all. And in this remembrance, the journey of forgiveness deepens even further, opening into new ways of seeing yourself and the world. When silence shows you the space where accusations dissolve, another quality becomes essential to carry this freedom into every moment of life. Stillness opens the doorway, but what allows you to walk through is mindfulness. Mindfulness is the clear mirror of awareness, reflecting whatever arises without distortion. A mirror does not cling to what it shows, nor does it reject it. It simply reflects. To practice mindfulness in this way is to learn to see your thoughts, emotions, and actions without judgment, just as they are. This simple clarity transforms the relationship you have with yourself and allows self-forgiveness to grow naturally. Mindfulness has often been misunderstood as a technique of control, as though the purpose were to eliminate unwanted thoughts or maintain a constant state of calm. But mindfulness is not control, it is presence. It is the willingness to see what arises in the mind without turning away, without amplifying, and without suppression. When practiced as a mirror, mindfulness does not add commentary or evaluation. It shows you directly and immediately the truth of this moment. The power of this reflection is that it breaks the habit of identification. When a harsh thought arises, "I am a failure," the untrained mind grasps it as truth. With mindfulness, you see it as a thought, no more substantial than a passing cloud. The mirror reflects it and lets it go. This changes everything. What once felt like permanent judgment becomes recognized as a fleeting event. Mindfulness does not deny the thought. It simply reveals its impermanence. Self-forgiveness becomes natural when you relate to yourself in this way. Instead of fighting your inner critic or drowning in it, you watch it arise, linger, and fade. The mirror does not hold on to the insult, nor does it retaliate. It simply shows. This neutrality creates space, and in that space, compassion emerges. You see that your suffering is not proof of failure, but part of the human condition. Forgiveness comes not by erasing thoughts, but by refusing to be imprisoned by them. This quality of reflection also teaches balance. Without mindfulness, the mind is either grasping or rejecting, chasing what it wants, resisting what it fears. Both reactions create suffering. Mindfulness, like a mirror, does neither. It reflects joy without clinging to it, pain without rejecting it. This balance allows you to meet every part of your experience with steadiness. Forgiveness grows here, because you no longer exaggerate mistakes into permanent stains, nor deny them into unconscious shadows. You simply see, and in seeing, you release. On a practical level, mindfulness can be cultivated in simple daily acts. Eating, walking, washing dishes, all become opportunities to practice reflecting without judgment. When eating, notice the taste, texture, and smell of food, not with criticism but with openness. When walking, feel the contact of your feet with the ground, the rhythm of movement. Each act becomes a mirror moment, a chance to notice without commentary. These small practices train the mind to meet even larger challenges like guilt or regret with the same clarity. Mindfulness also reveals the subtle layers of suffering hidden beneath surface judgments. A thought of self-criticism often carries fear, sadness, or longing underneath it. The mirror shows these layers gently, allowing you to acknowledge them without harshness. This depth of seeing prevents forgiveness from being superficial. Instead of glossing over pain, you recognize it fully and let it move through. True forgiveness requires this kind of honesty, which mindfulness provides. The mirror of mindfulness is also powerful in relationships. When someone criticizes you, the mind often reacts with defensiveness or collapse. But with mindfulness, you reflect the words without immediately taking them as truth. You hear them, notice the feelings they stir, and remain steady. This reflection creates space to respond wisely instead of reacting blindly. It also helps you see others more clearly, beyond the projections of your own fears or desires. Compassion grows from this clarity. Another dimension of mindfulness as a mirror is that it does not select. A mirror reflects beauty and ugliness equally, without preference. In the same way, mindfulness invites you to see all of yourself, your kindness and your cruelty, your wisdom and your ignorance without bias. This impartiality is not cold but compassionate. It means you are no longer split between the parts you accept and the parts you reject. You embrace the whole of yourself, and forgiveness naturally follows. This practice also undermines perfectionism. Perfectionism thrives on selective seeing. It magnifies flaws and ignores strengths. The mirror, by contrast, reflects both without exaggeration. You begin to see that you are not defined by extremes, but by the totality of your being, always shifting, always evolving. Forgiveness arises when you stop believing the distorted reflection of the critic and trust the neutrality of the mirror. Mindfulness also deepens understanding of interdependence. When you reflect without judgment, you notice that thoughts and emotions arise from causes and conditions. Anger may come from exhaustion, guilt from past conditioning, sadness from loss. By seeing these links clearly, you stop blaming yourself as if you were a fixed, isolated self. Forgiveness arises because you understand this moment too is conditioned and therefore not permanent. Meditation on mindfulness of thoughts directly cultivates this ability. Sit quietly and watch the mind. A memory arises, reflect it. A judgment arises, reflect it. A kind thought arises, reflect it. In each case, you do not cling or reject. You simply notice and let it pass. Over time, the practice becomes second nature. When self-criticism appears in daily life, you no longer collapse into it. You see it as one reflection among countless others. The mirror remains steady, regardless of what it shows. Forgiveness is woven into this steadiness. To forgive yourself is to stop identifying with every passing thought, to stop clinging to every painful memory as identity. It is to recognize that the mirror is never stained by what it reflects. No matter how many mistakes arise in your awareness, the awareness itself remains clear. This recognition is freedom. You forgive not by erasing the reflection, but by resting in the clarity of the mirror itself. Mindfulness also strengthens resilience. Life will always bring challenges, criticism, and mistakes. But with the mirror of mindfulness, you no longer fear them. You know they will arise, be reflected, and pass. This steadiness allows you to walk through life with openness rather than defensiveness. Forgiveness becomes continuous, not a single act, but a way of being, meeting each moment with clarity and compassion. The practice extends even to the deepest wounds. Trauma and betrayal often leave marks that feel permanent, but mindfulness reveals that even these experiences are not fixed identities. The mirror shows the pain without clinging to it. Over time, the intensity softens, the story loosens, and forgiveness becomes possible. This does not erase the past, but it releases the hold of judgment on the present. In the end, mindfulness as a mirror reminds you of your true nature. You are not the reflections, the thoughts, the judgments, the mistakes. You are the awareness that reflects them all. This awareness is never harmed, never broken, never unworthy. To rest in this truth is to embody self-forgiveness. The mirror remains clear, no matter what passes before it. And from this clarity, you are ready to look even deeper into how suffering itself can become a teacher, revealing hidden truths about freedom through the very pain of self-criticism. When mindfulness shows you that thoughts of judgment are only fleeting reflections, another truth begins to emerge. The very sting of self-criticism itself carries a hidden message. Beneath the discomfort, beneath the endless voice of guilt, lies a doorway to freedom. This is not about denying the pain of self-condemnation, but about understanding its deeper nature. The Buddha taught that suffering is not meaningless. It is the first noble truth, the signpost that points toward liberation. Self-criticism, when examined with awareness, reveals this same path. The harshness you feel is not evidence of your failure, it is the very evidence that the path to freedom is calling you. Self-criticism can feel relentless, a voice that follows you everywhere. But when viewed through the lens of the noble truths, this suffering becomes the ground of practice. The first noble truth acknowledges that suffering exists. The second shows its cause: clinging, ignorance, craving. In self-criticism, both are revealed clearly. You suffer because you cling to an image of who you should be, because you crave perfection, because you believe the voice of judgment is truth. This recognition is painful, but it is also profound. It means your suffering is not random. It arises from causes, and what arises from causes can be understood and released. The third noble truth declares that suffering can cease. Applied to self-criticism, this means the endless cycle of guilt is not inevitable. When you recognize its causes, you begin to loosen them. You see that the voice of judgment gains power only when you cling to it. When you let it pass, as mindfulness teaches, the suffering weakens. This is not wishful thinking, it is the law of cause and effect. Just as clinging creates suffering, release creates freedom. The fourth noble truth is the path. The steps of right view, right intention, right speech, and so on. These principles become the tools to transform self-criticism into self-liberation. Right view allows you to see the voice of guilt for what it is: a conditioned pattern, not truth. Right intention directs you toward compassion instead of punishment. Right speech teaches you to speak inwardly with kindness. Right effort reminds you to cultivate wholesome states rather than feeding the critic. Each element of the path is a way to dismantle the suffering of self-condemnation and build the foundation for forgiveness. Understanding self-criticism through this lens shifts everything. Instead of seeing it as a flaw to be erased, you see it as a teacher pointing you back to the noble truths. The pain you feel is not a dead end, but a signal that something is out of alignment. When you pay attention to that signal, you begin to walk the path. The very voice that once crushed you becomes the doorway to freedom, because it reveals so clearly where ignorance holds power. This approach also prevents despair. Often, guilt feels unbearable because it seems meaningless suffering without reason. But the noble truths assure you that suffering always arises from causes, and those causes can be understood. When you view self-criticism this way, you stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and start asking, "What is this showing me?" The question shifts from condemnation to curiosity, and curiosity is the seed of liberation. On a practical level, you can apply this by tracing each moment of self-criticism back to its root. When the thought arises, "I am worthless," pause. Ask what attachment or belief lies underneath. Perhaps it is the belief that your worth depends on achievement. Perhaps it is the craving for approval. By identifying the cause, you begin to loosen its hold. The voice of self-criticism no longer feels like an eternal truth, but like a symptom pointing to its source. This tracing back is itself an act of compassion. Instead of reacting to the critic with more criticism, you respond with understanding. You see that the harsh voice is born from suffering, perhaps inherited from family, culture, or past wounds. Recognizing this, you meet it not with anger but with care. Just as the Buddha encouraged compassion for all beings caught in ignorance, you offer compassion to the part of yourself caught in the cycle of self-condemnation. Self-criticism also reveals the universal nature of suffering. It is easy to believe you are uniquely flawed, uniquely condemned. But when you look closely, you see that everyone wrestles with inner voices of doubt and guilt. This recognition dissolves isolation. You realize you are not alone in your struggle. You are part of the shared human journey. The noble truth of suffering applies to all beings, and in this shared truth lies connection. Forgiveness grows from this recognition. If others deserve compassion in their struggle, so do you. Another layer of insight comes when you notice how self-criticism attempts to protect you. The voice often says, "If I punish myself enough, I won't fail again." It arises from fear, from the desire to prevent suffering. But this strategy backfires. It creates the very suffering it seeks to avoid. Recognizing this reveals the ignorance at the root of self-criticism. The Noble Truths help you see that liberation does not come from tightening chains, but from loosening them. Self-forgiveness is not indulgence, it is the wiser response to suffering. Meditation practice can bring this recognition alive. When sitting quietly, notice how self-criticism appears as sensations, thoughts, and emotions. See how it arises, peaks, and fades. Notice what fuels it: memories, comparisons, expectations. As you observe, the cycle becomes clearer: craving for perfection, clinging to identity, ignorance of impermanence. Each element of the Noble Truths is revealed within this process, and with each cycle observed, the grip of self-criticism loosens. This way of seeing also empowers you to take action. The Noble Truths are not just philosophy, they are a guide to practice. When you see that self-criticism arises from certain conditions, you can begin to shift those conditions. Surround yourself with kindness rather than harshness. Practice speech that uplifts rather than condemns. Cultivate gratitude, patience, and compassion. These actions change the soil from which self-criticism grows, making space for self-forgiveness to flourish. Forgiveness becomes less about erasing the past and more about walking the path. Each moment of self-criticism becomes an invitation. Will you cling, or will you release? Will you condemn, or will you learn? Each choice builds momentum. Slowly, the cycle of suffering weakens and the cycle of freedom strengthens. This is the heart of the Noble Truths, not escape from life, but transformation within it. In relationships, applying this understanding changes how you meet others. When someone criticizes themselves harshly, you can gently remind them that their suffering too arises from causes. You can encourage them to see the Noble Truths within their own pain, showing them that the voice of guilt is not the end but the beginning of the path. By embodying this perspective, you not only free yourself but become a source of compassion for others. The noble truth hidden in self-criticism is that suffering is never wasted. Every pang of guilt, every harsh thought, every moment of despair can be transformed into insight. The pain itself becomes the teacher, pointing to the causes of suffering and the possibility of release. Forgiveness, then, is not separate from suffering but born out of it. When you trace the roots of self-criticism back to ignorance and clinging, you discover the wisdom to let go. This way of seeing transforms the entire landscape of inner life. No longer do you fear self-criticism as a sign of failure. You meet it as a messenger, guiding you toward awareness. You understand that its very presence confirms the noble truth of suffering, and thus confirms the path to freedom. Forgiveness ceases to be an abstract goal and becomes the natural fruit of wisdom. Living this truth does not mean self-criticism disappears forever. It may still arise, just as storms still come, but you meet it differently. Instead of collapsing, you recognize it, trace its cause, and return to the path. Each time you do, the voice loses power. Over time, it becomes not an enemy but a reminder, a signal pointing you back to awareness and compassion. The noble truth hidden in self-criticism is that the very thing you thought was proof of your unworthiness is in fact proof of your capacity to awaken. The suffering you feel is the path itself, urging you to see, to release, to forgive. In this light, you no longer resist self-criticism nor drown in it. You walk with it, learn from it, and let it guide you into freedom. And as this understanding deepens, the heart grows ready for an even more tender practice, sending loving kindness to the very self who once erred, embracing not only the future self you hope to become, but the wounded self who still longs for care. When self-criticism is revealed as a messenger pointing toward the noble truths, You begin to see that even your harshest inner struggles carry the seeds of liberation. Yet insight alone is not enough. The mind can understand why suffering arises, but the heart still aches with the memory of mistakes. Forgiveness requires more than wisdom. It requires warmth. This is where metta, or loving kindness, becomes essential not only for the self you are striving to become, but also for the self who faltered. Extending metta to the version of you who erred is perhaps the most radical and healing act, because it turns directly toward the wound rather than avoiding it. Metta is the practice of generating a boundless attitude of friendliness and goodwill. It begins with simple phrases repeated with intention. May I be safe, may I be happy, may I live with ease. These words are not mere wishes, they are seeds planted in the heart. Over time, the seeds grow into a field of compassion that softens judgment and opens forgiveness. When applied to the self who made mistakes, metta transforms the sharp edges of guilt into tenderness. You stop treating your past self as an enemy and begin to see them as someone deserving of care. This shift is profound because the tendency is often the opposite. People try to direct kindness only toward their future selves, the improved, more disciplined, more compassionate version they hope to become. The past self, the one who acted out of ignorance or fear, is treated with contempt. But this division only deepens suffering. Forgiveness cannot grow if part of you remains exiled. To heal fully, metta must extend backward, embracing the self who erred as much as the self who aspires. Practicing metta for the self who erred begins with recognition. That earlier version of you acted under conditions that shaped their choices, pain, confusion, limited understanding. They were doing the best they could with the awareness they had. To send them kindness is not to excuse harm, but to acknowledge their humanity. It is to look at the younger you, the one stumbling in darkness, and whisper, "I see your struggle, and I do not abandon you." This act of compassion repairs the split within. When you hold contempt for your past self, you create inner division. One part of you despises the other. This division breeds tension, insecurity, and shame. Metta reunites these parts by offering love where there was rejection. You become whole again, not by erasing the past, but by embracing it. The forgiveness that arises here is not abstract. It is embodied, felt in the heart as warmth, relief, and peace. Metta also rewrites the memory of mistakes. Normally, recalling a painful event triggers self-condemnation, but when you practice sending kindness to that memory, the association begins to shift. Instead of pain alone, the memory becomes linked with compassion. Over time, this changes the emotional imprint. The event remains part of your story, but it no longer burns. It becomes softened by the balm of kindness. This transformation is not denial, but integration. In meditation, this practice can be very specific. You can bring to mind a particular mistake, a moment where you hurt yourself or another. Visualize yourself as you were then confused, angry, lost. Then offer metta. May you be free from suffering. May you find peace. May you awaken to wisdom. At first, this may feel unnatural, even painful, because the instinct is to judge. But with persistence, the heart begins to open. Compassion flows not only to the present self, but backward through time. This backward extension of kindness has ripple effects in the present. When you soften toward your past, you also soften toward your present mistakes. You stop expecting yourself to be flawless and allow space for imperfection. This makes you more resilient because errors no longer feel like life sentences. They become moments where metta can be applied, teaching you again and again that compassion is stronger than judgment. Metta for the self who erred also transforms relationships. Often, the inability to forgive others mirrors the inability to forgive oneself. When you condemn your past self, you carry the same harshness into your view of others. But when you learn to offer kindness to your own mistakes, you naturally extend it outward. You begin to see others' harmful actions not as proof of their evil, but as evidence of their suffering and ignorance. This does not excuse harm, but it allows compassion to coexist with accountability. In this way, metta creates a cycle of healing. The more kindness you extend inward, the more naturally it flows outward. The more compassion you offer to your past, the more you forgive yourself in the present. Each act of loving kindness reinforces the truth that forgiveness is possible, that no part of you is unworthy of care. This practice also dismantles perfectionism. The belief that only the improved self deserves love creates an endless chase, always postponing compassion until some future moment of worthiness. Metta interrupts this by declaring that every version of you, past, present, future, is deserving now. This radical acceptance breaks the cycle of striving and brings peace. Another dimension of this practice is gratitude. By sending kindness to the self who erred, you begin to see that even their mistakes carried lessons. That version of you, stumbling and falling, created the conditions for the growth you now experience. Without them, the wisdom of today would not exist. Gratitude does not mean celebrating harm, but it does mean acknowledging the role of your past in shaping who you are. This gratitude makes forgiveness more natural, because you see the value hidden within the pain. Metta also addresses the body. Mistakes often leave physical imprints, tension in the shoulders, heaviness in the chest, unease in the stomach. By directing kindness inward, you soften these places of stored memory. Breathing metta into the body allows forgiveness to penetrate beyond thought, into the very tissues that carry the weight of guilt. This embodied compassion completes the process, ensuring forgiveness is not only intellectual but felt deeply. The depth of this practice lies in its inclusivity. No part of you is excluded. Even the parts you despise the most, the choices you regret most bitterly, are embraced. Metta does not divide you into worthy and unworthy selves. It holds all of you in unconditional kindness. This inclusivity is the very essence of forgiveness. Over time, metta for the self who erred becomes second nature. When painful memories arise, the instinct to judge softens, replaced by the instinct to send kindness. This does not mean mistakes lose their meaning. It means they lose their power to wound. They become woven into the fabric of compassion, reminders not of your failure but of your capacity to love. Living this way changes how you walk through life. Instead of bracing against the possibility of failure, you trust that compassion will meet you no matter what. This trust frees you to take risks, to act with courage, to engage fully with the world. Forgiveness is no longer a distant goal, but a continuous practice, woven into every breath and every memory. Metta for the self who erred is perhaps the deepest expression of self-forgiveness. It heals the fractures of identity, rewrites the memory of pain, and restores wholeness. It is not about excusing harm, but about remembering that every version of you was human, and every human deserves compassion. This practice ensures that no part of your life story remains outside the circle of love. And as this circle expands, it prepares you for an even more profound realization that even the acts you once labeled unforgivable dissolve under the light of emptiness, revealing freedom where once there was only despair. When loving kindness extends even to the parts of you that faltered, a deeper possibility begins to open. Compassion soothes the wounds of the past, yet one shadow can still linger. The idea that some acts are beyond forgiveness, that certain mistakes form a category of the unforgivable. This belief can weigh more heavily than the act itself, keeping the heart chained long after conditions have changed. To move beyond this barrier, Buddhist wisdom turns to shunyata, the teaching of emptiness. Emptiness does not erase responsibility, but dissolves the illusion that anything, including what we call an unforgivable act, exists with fixed, unchanging essence. When you see through this illusion, the very category of unforgivable collapses and a profound freedom becomes possible. Shunyata, often translated as emptiness, reveals that nothing exists independently or permanently. Every thought, action, and identity arises from conditions, causes interwoven with countless other causes. An act of harm may feel absolute when remembered, as if it exists as a solid object forever frozen in time. But emptiness shows that even such acts are not independent entities. They are events shaped by ignorance, fear, pain, and countless other conditions. When you see this, you stop treating mistakes as eternal monuments and begin to understand them as impermanent processes. The idea of an unforgivable act is built on the assumption that actions carry a permanent essence, a fixed stain that defines both the deed and the doer forever. But emptiness undermines this assumption. Just as the self is not fixed, neither are the actions associated with it. They ripple outward, they influence, but they do not carry eternal identity. To see this is to loosen the chains of despair. What once felt like an immovable block reveals itself as fluid, dependent, and open to transformation. This perspective is not about excusing harm. Recognizing emptiness does not deny consequences. The effects of harmful actions may linger, sometimes for years, shaping lives in painful ways. But even these consequences are not static. They, too, shift as conditions change through healing, apology, reconciliation, or simply the passage of time. Emptiness allows you to meet these realities with honesty and compassion, without clinging to the idea that any moment in history is beyond redemption. To apply shunyata to the notion of unforgivable acts is to see that labels themselves are empty. The word unforgivable is a concept, not an inherent property of the act. One person may call a mistake unforgivable, while another, with different perspective, may find room for compassion. The act itself does not carry the essence of unforgivability. The label is imposed by the mind. This realization softens the grip of judgment. You begin to question whether the permanence you assumed is real or just a story you've been repeating. Meditation on emptiness brings this into direct experience. When you sit and observe thoughts, you notice how they arise and dissolve, leaving no trace. Apply this same insight to memories of harm. The memory feels solid, but when observed closely, it too shifts images, sensations, emotions arise and fade. The act is not a fixed object, but a process reconstructed each time it is remembered. This insight reveals that even the heaviest memories are not permanent prisons. When you see emptiness, you also see interdependence. Acts arise not from isolated individuals, but from webs of conditions. A harmful word may be born from a childhood of neglect, a culture of violence, or a moment of deep confusion. This does not excuse the harm, but it reveals its context. Understanding this context allows compassion to coexist with responsibility. You see that what you once labeled unforgivable is not a single, independent reality, but a knot of conditions that can be untangled. Applying this insight to yourself is perhaps the most challenging. When you label one of your own actions unforgivable, you condemn yourself to eternal exile. But emptiness shows that even this is a delusion. The self who acted then is not the self who reflects now. Both are processes, changing moment by moment. The conditions that gave rise to the harmful act have shifted. To call yourself permanently defined by it is to ignore impermanence. Self-forgiveness arises naturally when you see that no self and no act is ever fixed. This perspective extends outward to others as well. When you view someone through the lens of unforgivable, you freeze them in time. You deny their capacity to grow. to change, to awaken, but emptiness reveals that they, too, are processes, not permanent beings. Their actions arose from conditions, and conditions can shift. This does not mean you must reconcile or trust, but it opens the possibility of compassion. The category of unforgivable is replaced by the recognition of potential for transformation. The liberation that comes from this insight is profound. You no longer carry the burden of absolute condemnation neither toward yourself nor toward others. Instead, you see life as a flow of conditions, ever changing. Forgiveness becomes not a single act of erasing, but a continuous recognition that nothing is fixed, that even the heaviest moments are part of an unfolding process. On a practical level, you can apply this by examining the stories you tell about the past. When you say, "What I did is unforgivable," pause and ask, what makes it unforgivable? Is it the act itself, or the label I have attached? Can I see the conditions that shaped it? Can I recognize how those conditions have changed? By questioning the story, you open space for forgiveness. The act remains real, the consequences remain real, but the permanence of condemnation dissolves. This dissolution also changes how you engage in repair. When you believe an act is unforgivable, you may avoid making amends, thinking it hopeless. But when you see emptiness, you recognize that repair is possible, even if partial. A sincere apology, a change in behavior, an act of service, these shift conditions. They may not erase the past, but they create new pathways. Emptiness frees you from despair and opens the possibility of growth through responsibility. Shunyata also transforms the relationship with memory. Memories of harm often replay vividly, as if carved in stone. But when observed closely, each recall is a new construction. The details change, the emotions shift. Seeing this malleability helps you loosen the belief that the past is fixed. You realize that even the memory of the unforgivable is empty of permanence. This does not trivialize pain. It frees you from being trapped in its repetition. The compassion that arises from this perspective is vast. When you see that no act carries eternal essence, you recognize that all beings, no matter how far they have strayed, remain capable of awakening. This is not naive optimism, but the logical extension of emptiness. If nothing is fixed, then transformation is always possible. The very acts once labeled unforgivable become reminders of the boundless potential for change. For yourself, this means you are never beyond forgiveness. No matter the mistake, you are not permanently stained. You are a process of becoming, shaped by conditions that can be transformed. Forgiveness is not a reward for being perfect. It is the recognition that you are never fixed in imperfection. Shunyata dissolves the weight of eternal guilt and opens the path of continuous renewal. For others, this means you can hold even those who harmed you in the light of possibility. This does not mean tolerating abuse or denying justice. It means refusing to freeze them in the label of unforgivable. You protect yourself wisely, you acknowledge consequences, but you do not condemn them as permanently broken. This openness is itself a form of forgiveness, because it releases your heart from the burden of eternal hatred. Shunyata and the dissolving of unforgivable acts is perhaps one of the most radical teachings of Buddhism. It challenges the deepest instincts of judgment and retribution, but it also offers the deepest freedom. To see emptiness is to see that nothing, not even the heaviest mistake, is beyond the reach of compassion. Forgiveness here is not erasure, but awakening the recognition that in the emptiness of all things lies the possibility of endless renewal. And when this insight becomes lived, the weight of the past no longer binds you. You are free to step into each moment as new, carrying lessons but not chains. This freedom naturally leads into another doorway of practice, embracing life with the openness of a beginner's mind, where every moment is fresh, unburdened by judgment, and alive with possibility. When the illusion of unforgivable acts dissolves through the wisdom of emptiness, what follows is not merely relief, but a new way of meeting life itself. If nothing is fixed, if no past mistake defines you permanently, then every moment holds the possibility of renewal. To live this truth is to embrace what Zen calls beginner's mind, a mind that does not cling to old judgments, old stories, or old identities, but meets each moment as fresh. Beginner's mind is not naivety, it is liberation. It is the willingness to let the past fall away so fully that the present can be seen without distortion. Beginner's mind means laying down the burden of knowing too much about who you are. The mind loves to construct definitions. I am this kind of person, I always do this, I never succeed at that. These judgments may be born from experience, but once carried forward, they become self-fulfilling. You look at life through the lens of what you believe about yourself, repeating the past endlessly. Beginner's mind interrupts this cycle. It says, "You are not yesterday's version of yourself. You are alive now, and now is unshaped, unchained, new." This way of seeing changes the texture of forgiveness. Self-forgiveness is often blocked by the belief that the past is an anchor. You tell yourself, "Because I failed then, I will fail again." But beginner's mind cuts that chain. It allows you to meet yourself in this moment without dragging yesterday into it. You are no longer repeating a story, you are beginning again. Forgiveness becomes not a grand act of erasure, but a simple return to now, where freedom already exists. The practice of beginner's mind requires humility. To meet life freshly means admitting you do not know everything, not about others, not about yourself, not about what is possible. This humility is liberating because it frees you from the rigid certainty that fuels self-condemnation. Instead of insisting you know exactly how flawed you are, you admit, "I do not know." In that not knowing, forgiveness becomes possible. The future is open, not predetermined by past judgments. On a practical level, cultivating beginner's mind can start with the simplest acts. When you eat, notice the taste as if for the first time without comparing to past meals. When you walk, feel each step without rehearsing old worries. These small practices train the mind to approach experience without the weight of memory. Over time, this quality seeps into deeper places, into how you meet regret, guilt, and self-criticism. Instead of responding with the reflex of old stories, you pause and open to the freshness of now. Beginner's mind is also a way of meeting relationships. So often, we imprison others in judgments as we imprison ourselves. They always disappoint me. They never change. These labels prevent real connection. By approaching others with beginner's mind, you give them space to be different, to grow, to surprise you. This openness mirrors the forgiveness you extend to yourself. If you are not fixed in your past, neither are they. Relationships transform when both sides are free to be new. This practice also dissolves perfectionism. Perfectionism thrives on the belief that life should match a pre-existing script, that only when things unfold exactly as expected are they worthwhile. Beginner's mind throws out the script. It welcomes what arises, even if it contradicts your plans. This openness softens the pressure to be flawless. You no longer demand that life, or yourself, conform to rigid standards. You meet what is here as it is, and in doing so, you discover freedom. Beginner's mind also nurtures creativity. Old judgments suffocate new possibilities. When you believe you already know what you are capable of, you stop experimenting. But beginner's mind allows exploration without fear. You can try, fail, and try again, because each attempt is not chained to the last. Forgiveness is embedded in this process. Mistakes are not signs of permanent failure, but part of the unfolding. Creativity thrives when the mind is free to begin anew. Meditation is a direct path to cultivating this mind. Each time the mind drifts into old stories, you return to the breath, to the body, to this moment. Each return is a practice of beginning again. Over time, the habit of renewal becomes natural. You learn to carry it into daily life, not only on the cushion but in every choice, every thought, every encounter. Beginner's mind becomes a way of living forgiveness continuously. This perspective also softens fear. Fear is often rooted in the assumption that the future must repeat the past. If you failed before, you will fail again. If you suffered once, you will suffer always. Beginner's mind dissolves this assumption by returning you to the freshness of now. The future is not predetermined. It is being written in this moment. Fear loses its grip when you see that each step is uncharted, not bound to past footprints. Beginner's mind is not about denying memory or pretending the past never happened. It is about refusing to let memory dictate the present. You can acknowledge what occurred without carrying it as identity. You can learn from it without being defined by it. This balance, honoring the past without being trapped by it, is what makes forgiveness real. It does not erase, but it liberates. The beauty of beginner's mind is its inclusivity. It applies not only to moments of joy, but also to moments of pain. When suffering arises, you do not compare it to past suffering or project it into the future. You meet it freshly, noticing the sensations, the emotions, the thoughts, without layering judgment. This openness allows the pain to move through without solidifying into identity. Forgiveness arises because you stop repeating the story that suffering defines you. In relationships with yourself, beginner's mind replaces harshness with curiosity. Instead of saying, "I already know I am flawed," you ask, "What is here now?" This curiosity is gentle, patient, and forgiving. It treats the self not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be explored. Each moment becomes an opportunity to learn, rather than a verdict to endure. This practice also strengthens resilience. Life will bring mistakes, but beginner's mind ensures that each one is met freshly. You do not collapse into despair because you no longer believe mistakes define you permanently. You begin again, each time. This resilience is forgiveness in action, lived not as a one-time event, but as an ongoing capacity to renew. The liberation of beginner's mind lies in its simplicity. It asks only that you release the grip of judgment and meet life as it is. In that release, forgiveness flows naturally. You are no longer bound by who you thought you were, nor by who others thought you were. You are free to be new, moment by moment. And as this openness deepens, another pattern becomes clear. While the mind has the capacity to renew, it also has the tendency to trap itself in repetition. Self-criticism often returns in cycles, repeating the same accusations endlessly. To truly sustain forgiveness, you must also see how this repetition functions and how to break free from the samsara of self-blame that keeps the cycle spinning. When beginner's mind shows you that each moment is fresh, you begin to taste freedom. But at the same time, another truth becomes clear. The mind is deeply conditioned to repeat. Even when you long to step into the present, you may find yourself dragged back into the same familiar patterns, the same accusations, the same cycle of self-blame. This endless rehearsal is samsara, the cycle of suffering that turns in circles without resolution. To truly forgive yourself, you must learn how to break this cycle not by force, but by understanding its nature and loosening its grip. Self-blame functions like a wheel. A memory of a mistake arises. It triggers guilt. Guilt fuels judgment. Judgment reinforces the story of failure, and the story brings the memory back again. Round and round it goes. Each turn feels like proof of permanence, as though the cycle defines who you are. But in Buddhist teaching, samsara is not destiny, it is a process. What is created by conditions can be dismantled when those conditions are seen clearly. The cycle persists only because it remains unconscious. With awareness, the wheel can stop. The repetition of self-blame often disguises itself as responsibility. You may believe that revisiting your mistakes endlessly shows moral depth. That constant guilt is a sign you truly care. But this is illusion. Endless blame does not heal the past or prevent future harm. It simply keeps you trapped in suffering. True responsibility is different. It acknowledges what happened, learns the lesson, and acts differently now. Responsibility moves forward. Self-blame circles endlessly. Mindfulness is the key to noticing when the cycle is turning. Each time the familiar thought arises, "I should have done better." Pause and see it as part of the wheel. Instead of stepping into the story, observe it spinning. Notice the sensation in the body, the emotion in the heart, the belief in the mind. See how they feed each other. By noticing, you weaken identification. The cycle may still turn, but you are no longer trapped inside it. This simple awareness begins to slow the wheel. The cycle of self-blame also thrives on comparison. You look at others and believe they are freer of mistakes, more worthy, less flawed. This fuels the story that you alone deserve endless judgment. But comparison is itself a cycle, born from clinging to identity. Buddhism teaches that each being has their own path, their own conditions, their own struggles. By recognizing this, you dissolve the illusion that your suffering is unique or deserved. The wheel of comparison loses power when you see the shared humanity beneath it. Breaking the cycle requires compassion as much as clarity. Awareness alone may show you the wheel, but compassion gives you the courage to step off it. Without compassion, you may use awareness itself as another weapon, judging yourself for still being caught. But compassion reminds you that cycles are natural, that conditioning is strong, and that freedom comes not from perfection but from patience. Each time you notice the repetition and choose kindness instead of judgment, you loosen the grip a little more. On a deeper level, the cycle of self-blame mirrors the larger cycle of samsara in Buddhist cosmology, the endless wandering through states of suffering driven by ignorance, craving, and aversion. Just as beings are reborn into realms according to karma, the self is reborn into the same painful thoughts according to habit. The teaching is the same. Liberation comes through seeing clearly, letting go of craving for perfection, and cultivating wisdom. When applied inwardly, this means no longer craving to be flawless and no longer clinging to the story of failure. In daily life, breaking the cycle can be practiced through intentional pauses. When a wave of self-blame arises, pause before reacting. Breathe. Ask, is this thought useful? Does it guide me toward healing, or is it the wheel spinning again? By questioning, you interrupt automatic repetition. Over time, the mind learns new habits, not of condemnation but of presence. The cycle weakens because you stop feeding it with unquestioned belief. Relationships often reflect this inner cycle. If you are caught in self-blame, you may project it outward, repeatedly apologizing for old mistakes, seeking reassurance, or expecting rejection. This can strain connections as others feel trapped in your cycle. By breaking free inwardly, you also free relationships. You stop dragging the past into every interaction and allow trust to grow fresh. Forgiveness becomes possible not only within yourself, but between yourself and others. Meditation can be a laboratory for observing samsara. Sit quietly and notice how the mind loops. The same thought arises again and again, sometimes disguised in different words. By staying present, you see the cycle as process rather than identity. You realize this is what the mind does, not who I am, This insight is liberating. It allows you to stop fighting the cycle with aggression and instead meet it with wisdom. Each observation loosens the wheel a little more. Another layer of this practice is cultivating opposite states. Self-blame thrives in harshness. Cultivate kindness. It thrives in rigidity. Cultivate flexibility. It thrives in hopelessness. Cultivate gratitude. Each wholesome state interrupts the pattern, planting seeds of new momentum. This is not denial of pain, but transformation of energy. The wheel of blame is replaced by the path of growth. Breaking the cycle also requires seeing its futility. Ask yourself, what has endless self-blame ever achieved? Has it repaired the past? Has it prevented future mistakes? Or has it only deepened suffering? By facing these questions honestly, you begin to see that the cycle is not noble or useful. Its only function is to keep you turning in place. This recognition creates motivation to step off, to choose forgiveness as a wiser response. Samsara, as repetition of self-blame, is not unique to you, it is a shared human experience. Everyone carries loops of regret, guilt, and criticism. This universality can bring comfort, dissolving the isolation that blame creates. When you see that others too struggle with the same cycles, compassion expands. You stop treating yourself as uniquely broken and start recognizing your place in the larger human story. Forgiveness arises from this shared understanding. The liberation from this cycle does not happen all at once. Like a wheel slowing gradually, it takes repeated pauses, repeated acts of compassion, repeated moments of clarity. But each time you step out of the cycle, even briefly, you taste freedom. Over time, the momentum shifts. The wheel turns less often, less strongly, until eventually it stops defining you. What once felt like eternal condemnation becomes recognized as habit, and habits can change. Living in this freedom means carrying lessons rather than chains. You acknowledge your mistakes, you honor their impact, but you do not circle endlessly around them. You take the wisdom and move forward. This is true forgiveness, not forgetting, not excusing, but refusing to remain trapped in repetition. Forgiveness is the act of stepping off the wheel and walking the path of freedom. And as you walk this path, you discover another balance that must be cultivated. To leave behind endless blame does not mean abandoning accountability. There is a way to hold responsibility with clarity while refusing to torture yourself. This balance is the next step. Learning right view on responsibility, where you honor the consequences of your actions without collapsing into despair or harsh self-hatred. When the cycle of self-blame is seen clearly as samsara, you realize that endlessly rehearsing guilt is not the same as taking responsibility. Repetition keeps you trapped, responsibility frees you, yet here lies a delicate balance that many struggle with. To acknowledge harm without collapsing into despair, to accept accountability without fueling self-hatred requires right view. This is the wisdom that sees responsibility as a path to growth rather than as a lifelong sentence. With right view, you learn to carry your actions honestly while refusing the burden of torture. Right view begins with clarity. Responsibility does not mean exaggerating mistakes into eternal verdicts, nor does it mean minimizing them to avoid discomfort. It means seeing actions for what they are, causes that created effects. If you spoke harshly, it may have hurt someone. If you acted carelessly, it may have brought suffering. Responsibility acknowledges this without distortion. Self-torture, by contrast, distorts, turning a single act into proof of unworthiness or denying it altogether. Right view is honesty without extremes. When practiced deeply, responsibility becomes an act of compassion. To see clearly how your actions ripple into others' lives awakens empathy. You realize that words and deeds carry weight, and you begin to choose them with care. This awareness is not punishment but love, the love that refuses to cause unnecessary suffering. Responsibility is not a chain around your neck. It is a compass guiding you toward more skillful living. Self-torture thrives on identification. You say, "I am my mistake," and the story hardens. Responsibility, through right view, dissolves this illusion. It recognizes that while you caused harm, you are not fixed as the one who harms. You are a changing process, capable of learning and acting differently. Responsibility points to choice. Self-hatred denies it. Right view keeps you aligned with choice, reminding you that every moment is a chance to plant new seeds. On a practical level, this means shifting how you respond to guilt. When guilt arises, you can ask, "What does this show me about the impact of my actions? What can I do now to repair, to grow, to prevent this in the future?" These questions channel guilt into responsibility. Without right view, guilt spirals into self-condemnation. With right view, guilt becomes fuel for transformation. The difference lies in whether you see the feeling as proof of identity or as a call to action. Responsibility also involves repair. When harm has been caused, words or actions may help heal the wound. Apology, restitution, change of behavior, these are ways of honoring responsibility without self-torture. Self-hatred may paralyze you, making repair impossible. Responsibility empowers you, reminding you that healing is possible through action. The past cannot be erased, but the present can be shaped. Each step of repair loosens the weight of guilt, proving that you are not condemned, but capable of change. This practice is supported by mindfulness. With mindfulness, you can notice when responsibility tips into self-hatred. You can feel the shift, the tightening in the chest, the thought that says, "I am worthless," the hopelessness that follows. By noticing, you can pause and return to clarity. This is responsibility, not identity. This distinction is essential. Without it, you may confuse endless blame with moral integrity. With it, you see that true integrity lies in moving forward with wisdom. Right view also prevents avoidance. Some, fearing self-hatred, swing to the other extreme, denying responsibility altogether. They say, "It doesn't matter," or "That wasn't my fault." But avoidance robs you of growth. Right view cuts through both extremes, neither drowning in guilt nor fleeing from truth. It stands firmly in the middle, acknowledging reality while refusing despair. This middle way is the foundation of forgiveness. In relationships, right view transforms how accountability is held. When you take responsibility without self-torture, others feel your sincerity. They sense your willingness to see clearly, to admit harm, to act differently. This builds trust, because your accountability is not about dramatic guilt, but about genuine care. Self-hatred may appear sincere, but it often makes others uncomfortable, as it shifts the focus away from healing and onto your suffering. Responsibility, grounded in right view, keeps the focus where it belongs, on repair, growth, and connection. This balance also shapes how you hold others accountable. If you confuse responsibility with self-torture in yourself, you may expect the same from others, believing they must suffer endlessly to prove sincerity. But with right view, you see that accountability does not require collapse. You can hold others responsible while still holding compassion, encouraging growth rather than demanding eternal shame. This balance heals not only individuals but communities. Another dimension of right view on responsibility is patience. Change takes time. To hold yourself accountable without self-hatred is to recognize that transformation unfolds gradually. Each effort matters, even if imperfect. Self-torture demands instant perfection and condemns you when you fall short. Right view understands that responsibility is a lifelong practice of aligning with wisdom, not a test you must pass immediately. Patience allows forgiveness to coexist with responsibility. Meditation supports this patience by showing you impermanence directly. When you sit, you see how thoughts of guilt arise and pass, how determination arises and passes. Nothing is fixed. This direct experience reinforces right view. You are not trapped in a single identity. You are a stream of conditions, always changing. Responsibility is simply the choice to guide that stream with care. Forgiveness blossoms naturally in this balance. When you hold responsibility with clarity, you see that growth is possible. You no longer need to punish yourself endlessly, because punishment adds nothing. Forgiveness is not denial of harm, but recognition that you are more than harm. It is the choice to continue walking the path of awareness rather than circling the wheel of blame. Living this way creates resilience. Mistakes will still happen, but you meet them with clarity rather than collapse. You acknowledge, learn, and move forward. This resilience is freedom. It means you are no longer at the mercy of guilt's extremes. You carry responsibility as a guide, not as a weapon against yourself. Right view on responsibility also deepens compassion for others who struggle with guilt. You can remind them that accountability does not mean endless shame, that growth is possible even after harm. Your own practice becomes a model of this truth, offering hope where others might feel trapped. This ripple effect extends the healing beyond yourself. Ultimately, right view shows that responsibility and self-forgiveness are not opposites, they are partners. To hold yourself accountable with wisdom is the very path of forgiveness. You forgive not by denying your actions, but by refusing to turn accountability into torture. You see clearly, you act wisely, and you release the weight of judgment. In this way, the balance is maintained. Integrity without despair, honesty without hatred, growth without chains. And from this balance arises another opening. Responsibility carried with compassion allows you not only to forgive yourself, but also to receive forgiveness from others. Accepting the compassion of others without resistance becomes the next step, a mirror that reflects your own capacity to be free. When responsibility is held with right view, you discover a balance that frees you from the weight of self-hatred. Yet, even with clarity, many hearts remain reluctant to accept another layer of healing, the forgiveness that comes from outside. To allow others to forgive you can feel more difficult than forgiving yourself because it requires vulnerability. It means letting compassion reach you where shame once built walls. And yet, when received, this forgiveness becomes a gift. It reflects back your own worthiness, reminding you that liberation is not meant to be walked alone. The resistance to receiving forgiveness often comes from pride, disguised as guilt. You may think, I cannot accept their kindness because I don't deserve it. But this belief is another form of ego, a refusal to let life move through you. It keeps you isolated in your pain, holding tight to control. Letting others forgive you is an act of surrender, of trusting that compassion is greater than your self-judgment. In this surrender, something extraordinary happens. Their forgiveness becomes a mirror, showing you the possibility of your own self-forgiveness. To receive forgiveness is not weakness, it is courage. It means opening to the tenderness of another without defense, without hiding behind guilt or denial. This openness creates connection because forgiveness is relational. It cannot exist in isolation. When you allow another's compassion to reach you, you honor not only yourself, but also them. You give them the freedom to offer love, and in accepting it, you strengthen the bond between you. The process begins with trust. To let others forgive you, you must trust that their compassion is genuine, not pity or performance. This trust requires humility. You must step out of the role of judge and allow another's perspective to matter. Often, the one who forgives sees your humanity more clearly than you do. They see the sincerity of your regret, the effort of your growth. Their forgiveness is not blind, it is based on recognition. Trusting their vision allows you to soften the harshness of your own. There is also a hidden generosity in receiving forgiveness. When you accept another's compassion, you allow them the gift of giving. To forgive is healing for both sides. Refusing their forgiveness can block this mutual healing, leaving both burdened. Accepting it allows the energy of reconciliation to flow freely. It turns a wound into a bridge, a source of suffering into a source of connection. Mindfulness helps in this process. When forgiveness is offered, notice the mind's reflex to resist thoughts like, "I don't deserve this," or "they're just saying it." See these as passing stories, not truth. Then return to the present moment, the tone of their voice, the sincerity in their eyes, the weight lifting in the space between you. By staying present, you allow forgiveness to be received fully, without being filtered through old judgments. In relationships, this practice can be transformative. Many conflicts linger not because forgiveness is withheld, but because it is not received. One person offers compassion, the other resists, and the wound remains open. When forgiveness is received sincerely, healing deepens. Both sides are freed. The one who forgives no longer carries resentment, and the one forgiven no longer carries shame. The relationship can move forward, not by forgetting, but by integrating the past into a new chapter. This gift extends beyond close relationships. Sometimes forgiveness comes from unexpected places: a colleague, a community, even a stranger who chooses compassion over judgment. Accepting it broadens your sense of belonging. You see that kindness is not limited to those who know you deeply. It is part of the human capacity. Each act of received forgiveness affirms your place in this shared humanity. For those who struggle to forgive themselves, letting others forgive them can be the doorway. Often, self-forgiveness feels unreachable because the inner critic is too strong. But when another looks at you with compassion, it interrupts the cycle. You begin to wonder, if they can see me with kindness, perhaps I can too. Their forgiveness becomes a model, a reflection of what is possible. Over time, this external compassion teaches you to internalize the same attitude. This does not mean you should depend entirely on others for forgiveness. Self-forgiveness remains essential. But receiving forgiveness from others can accelerate the process, especially when your own heart feels closed. It reminds you that compassion is not something you must generate alone. It flows between beings. This flow is part of interdependence. You are healed not only in isolation but in connection. Accepting forgiveness also deepens accountability. Paradoxically, when you let others forgive you, you feel more committed to growth. Their trust in you inspires you not to betray it. Their compassion becomes fuel for change. This is why receiving forgiveness is not indulgence but responsibility. It is a recognition that you are trusted to live differently, and that trust strengthens your resolve. Meditation can prepare you for this openness. By practicing loving kindness, you become familiar with the feeling of giving compassion. This makes it easier to receive it because you recognize its authenticity. You know from your own heart what forgiveness feels like, so you trust it when it is offered to you. This mutual recognition dissolves suspicion and opens the door to acceptance. There is also a profound humility in letting others forgive you. It means admitting that you cannot always carry everything alone, that you sometimes need the compassion of others to lift what feels unbearable. This humility is not defeat, it is wisdom. It reflects the truth of interbeing. No one is separate, no one heals alone. Forgiveness received is a reminder of this truth. Over time, the willingness to let others forgive you reshapes your identity. You stop defining yourself solely by your mistakes and begin to see yourself as someone worthy of compassion. This shift is not arrogance, it is balance. You hold your actions honestly, but you also hold your humanity with tenderness. The mirror of another's forgiveness helps you see what your own harsh eyes could not. This practice also ripples outward. When you learn to receive forgiveness, you become more generous in offering it. You know firsthand the courage it takes to accept compassion, so you extend forgiveness to others with patience. You no longer demand that they punish themselves endlessly to prove sincerity. You give freely, knowing the gift is transformative. In this way, receiving forgiveness strengthens the entire web of compassion in which you live. Ultimately, the gift of letting others forgive you is the gift of connection. It breaks the isolation of guilt and draws you back into relationship with others, with yourself, with life itself. To receive forgiveness is to say yes to belonging, yes to compassion, yes to freedom. It affirms that no mistake defines you forever and that healing is possible in community as much as in solitude. When this truth is lived, forgiveness ceases to be a solitary act of willpower. It becomes a shared journey where your healing supports others and theirs supports you. And in this shared journey, another dimension of liberation becomes available, the ability to bring humor, lightness, and playfulness into the process. Compassion need not always be solemn. Sometimes laughter itself can be a path, softening guilt and turning even the heaviest memories into opportunities for joy. When the heart learns to receive forgiveness from others, a new kind of freedom emerges. You see that compassion is not limited to solemn gestures or heavy silence. It can also be playful, light, and filled with laughter. Forgiveness does not always need to wear the robes of seriousness. Sometimes the most healing balm is humor, the kind that arises not from cruelty or mockery but from tenderness. Compassionate humor is a Dharma practice because it loosens the grip of guilt, reminding us that we are more than our mistakes and that joy is as sacred as seriousness on the path of awakening. Guilt often thrives in heaviness. It builds a sense of gravity around mistakes, making them feel larger than life. Every slip becomes monumental, every regret an anchor. Humor disrupts this pattern. By laughing gently at our own tendencies, we shrink the inflated importance of guilt. We see our flaws not as eternal verdicts, but as part of the human comedy, something to smile at even while we learn. This smile is not denial, it is wisdom wearing a lighter face. In Buddhist stories, humor is not absent. Many Zen masters used wit and paradox to awaken their students. Their laughter was not careless, but compassionate, pointing beyond rigid seriousness to the freedom of direct experience. A joke, a playful comment, even a sudden laugh in the midst of teaching these moments carried the power to break through the prison of the mind. In the same way, compassionate humor can break the prison of guilt. It reminds us that clinging to our mistakes as ultimate truths is itself absurd. Compassionate humor differs from harsh humor. Harsh humor ridicules, deepens wounds, and reinforces shame. Compassionate humor lifts. It laughs with, not at. It arises from kindness, offering perspective rather than punishment. To cultivate this kind of humor toward yourself is to practice a gentle art of forgiveness. It is to chuckle at the mind's stubbornness, at its endless rehearsals of self-blame, and to say, "There it goes again." In this chuckle lies release. The practice begins with noticing the absurdity of guilt's repetition. How often do you catch yourself replaying the same scene for the 100th time, as though one more replay will solve it? Compassionate humor sees this and smiles. The smile says, "Ah, the mind is doing its dance again." By laughing softly at the mind's habits, you stop taking them as seriously. The thought still arises, but its authority dissolves. Forgiveness slips in through the laughter. Humor also reconnects you to joy. Guilt narrows vision, focusing only on mistakes. Humor broadens perspective, reminding you that life is larger than your errors. A small laugh can open a window in a dark room, letting in air and light. When you learn to laugh gently at yourself, You remember that mistakes are part of the human condition and that joy remains available even in the midst of imperfection. This balance, acknowledging pain while embracing joy, is the essence of compassion. Compassionate humor can also deepen relationships. When you can laugh at your own missteps, you invite others to relax around theirs. You create an atmosphere where mistakes are not met with judgment but with humanity. This does not trivialize harm, it makes repair easier. Shared laughter softens tension, dissolves defensiveness, and opens space for healing conversations. Forgiveness is more likely to flourish in an atmosphere of lightness than in one of relentless heaviness. On a practical level, you can cultivate this practice by paying attention to the stories you tell yourself. Notice when guilt inflates a small mistake into a catastrophe. Pause, smile, and remind yourself how exaggerated the mind can be. Humor is a form of perspective, a way of saying, this too will pass, and perhaps it's not as dramatic as it feels. This perspective interrupts the spiral of self-criticism and allows compassion to take root. Meditation can also include humor. When the mind wanders again and again, many practitioners scold themselves. But compassionate humor smiles. There you go again, wandering off. Instead of frustration, you meet distraction with lightness. This shift makes practice sustainable because the mind is met with kindness rather than force. The same applies to daily life. When you forget, falter, or stumble, humor allows you to meet yourself with patience. Compassionate humor also exposes the ego's seriousness. The ego loves to dramatize, to make itself the center of every story. Guilt often carries this drama. My mistake is unforgivable. My failure defines everything. Humor punctures the ego's inflation. By laughing gently at its theatrics, you remember that life is bigger than your self-centered narrative. Forgiveness arises when you stop believing the drama and start smiling at it. This practice does not mean making light of real harm. If you caused pain, responsibility still matters. Compassionate humor is not avoidance. It is the ability to hold both responsibility and lightness together. You acknowledge the impact honestly, but you also refuse to collapse under the weight of guilt. You allow the possibility of growth and repair, carried on a current of kindness that sometimes takes the form of laughter. In relationships, sharing humor after conflict can be a form of reconciliation. When both sides are ready, a gentle laugh at the absurdity of human stubbornness can dissolve lingering tension. The humor says, we are both human, both imperfect, and both capable of moving forward. This laughter is not superficial, it is the sound of forgiveness settling into the heart. Compassionate humor also teaches resilience. Life will bring countless mistakes, and without humor, the weight can become unbearable. With humor, you learn to bounce back more quickly. You stumble, you smile, you rise again. Each laugh reminds you that failure is not the end. It is simply part of the dance. This resilience is itself a form of forgiveness, lived moment by moment. The practice also fosters humility. When you can laugh at yourself, you no longer cling to the illusion of being flawless. You embrace imperfection with grace. This humility opens the heart, making it easier to forgive both yourself and others. Humor dissolves the walls of pride, creating space for compassion to flow freely. Over time, compassionate humor reshapes identity. Instead of being the one who failed, you become the one who learns, who falls and rises, who laughs at the dance of life. This identity is lighter, freer, more forgiving. It does not deny mistakes, but refuses to be crushed by them. Humor becomes a companion on the path, walking alongside wisdom and compassion. The liberation found here is subtle but profound. You realize that forgiveness does not always need to be solemn. Sometimes the path to freedom is marked by smiles and laughter, by moments of lightness that break through the weight of guilt. Compassionate humor is not a distraction from practice, it is practice itself, a Dharma gate that leads to release. And when this gate is opened, another truth becomes visible. Just as humor loosens guilt, reflecting on mortality can loosen the grip of shame. To see how brief life truly is reveals how little sense it makes to cling to endless self-condemnation. Death contemplation becomes the next step, showing you that time is precious and that every breath is too valuable to waste on rehearsing guilt. You've walked through the path step by step, seeing how the tyranny of perfection dissolves, how karma is momentum, not punishment, how shame and shamelessness can be balanced by the middle way, how emptiness unravels the illusion of permanent mistakes, and how regret, once feared, can become a compass. You've learned to meet failures as teachers, to release identity stories, to turn the compassion of the Bodhisattva inward, and to recognize guilt as impermanent. Breath became a radical reset, silence a form of self-forgiveness, and mindfulness a mirror that reflects without judgment. Even self-criticism was revealed as a hidden noble truth, pointing you back to freedom. You practiced metta for the self who erred, discovered emptiness dissolves even the idea of the unforgivable, embraced beginner's mind, broke the cycle of samsara as self-blame, and learned responsibility without torture. You opened to the gift of others' forgiveness, softened guilt with compassionate humor, and saw how death contemplation and impermanence make forgiveness urgent, not optional. This is the heart of Buddhist wisdom. You are not your past, you are not your worst moment, and you are never beyond renewal. Forgiveness is not erasing, it is freeing. It is the gentle act of laying down the weight you've carried and stepping forward with clarity, compassion, and courage. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which part of this journey spoke to you most? Was it the breath, the silence, the humor, or the release of perfection? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one, and your reflections may be the light someone else needs. If you found value here and want to keep growing together, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell, so you never miss the next lesson in wisdom and freedom. Your journey continues, and I'd be honored to walk it with you.